I was on Green County Bank Board and City Capital and then bought Green County Bank.
Don't have him here?
Well, around, and here's my seat right next to the VIPs.
He's definitely
Is live now.
I'm going to
always. He has wonderful stories, great stories, and just been in banking so many years.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is the meeting of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission is called to order. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and I hope all is well. We will first call the roll. And for those joining virtually, is there anyone joining virtually today?
We have 2 members.
Just a reminder, please state whether there are others present in the room with you. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Chairwoman Scarlett,
Here.
Commissioner Allman,
Here, and no one is in the room with me.
Commissioner Cope, Commissioner Kingsolver,
Here, and I have 2 other people in the room with me.
Who
Commissioner.
are those people?
Yes. Thank you, Comptroller.
Commissioner Kingsolver, can you please let us know who else is in the room with you?
2 other roommates for my study abroad trip.
Do they have names? Roommate 1, roommate 2?
thing 1, thing 2.
All right. Commissioner Coben. Here. Commissioner Matlock.
Here.
Commissioner Moser.
Here.
Commissioner Stafford.
Present.
Commissioner Wharton. Commissioner Winton. Here. Secretary Hargett.
Here.
Treasurer Lillard.
Here.
Commissioner Morrison. Here. Comptroller Mumpower.
Here.
Oh, and it looks like Mayor Wharton. Mayor Wharton. Okay. So, Chairwoman, you have 12 members present and a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Next is our adoption of the agenda for today's meeting. I believe there may be a motion for today's agenda regarding the order we will take up the items. Otherwise, I can make a motion if there's none. So I move to change the schedule slightly, so we will move up the executive director conversation to the second item. And the executive director's report to the heel. Can I get a second on that?
Second.
Madam Secretary?
Chairwoman Scarlett.
Yes.
Commissioner Allman.
Yes.
Commissioner Kingsolver.
Aye.
Commissioner Coben. Yes. Commissioner Matlock.
Yes.
Commissioner Moser. Commissioner Stafford. Commissioner Wharton. Commissioner Winton.
Aye.
Secretary Hargett. Treasurer Lillard. Comptroller Mumpower.
Yes.
Chairwoman, you have 12 ayes.
Thank you. With no questions or objections, I will entertain a motion and a second to adopt the minutes from the January 27th, 2023 Commission meeting.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
With no objection, we can take a roll call vote. Madam Secretary?
Chairwoman Scarlett.
Yes.
Commissioner Allman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kingsolver,
Aye.
Commissioner Coben, Commissioner Matlock, Commissioner Moser, Commissioner Stafford,
Aye.
Commissioner Wharton,
Aye.
Commissioner Winton, Secretary Hargett, Treasurer Lillard,
Aye.
Comptroller Mumpower.
Aye.
Chairwoman, you have 12 ayes.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome all the commissioners here, as well as the staff and our interim executive director, Bob Smith, and of course, our lovely audience here. I'm new into this role, and I've spent the past few months getting to know a lot of the THEC staff here, as well as talking with some of my fellow commission members. And as part of the executive director search, we've spoken to many local and national connectors, people that know a lot about Tennessee, inside and out of Tennessee, and have a lot of perspective on the work that we're doing here. And gaining that perspective has really helped me kind of reaffirm that we are still a leader in post-secondary education, policy, innovation, and implementation. We should all be really proud of the work that we've done here. The staff and the work that's happened across all of our institutions have done phenomenal. And it's been going on for more than a decade with the Complete College Tennessee Act of 2010. Currently, the state is on the cutting edge of economic development with major announcements and business growth like Blue Oval City, which we'll hear more about today. But I want to take us back 5 years. It's really hard to imagine 5 years ago, I get it. But imagine 2018. 2/3 of the occupations at that time were considered high demand. Those that were considered high demand in 2018 are not considered high demand today. That's a lot of change. For those of you that have cell phones, I'm guessing most people in here have a cell phone. My guess is in the past 5 years, you might have received 1 or 2 different versions of the same phone. Think about the cars that exist on the road. The amount of electric cars that are changing the way that we think about how far we drive, where we have to fuel, or where we have to plug in. Things are changing in our world. Grocery shopping has changed. Over the past 5 years, most of us can walk into a grocery store today and you can do a self-scan. You don't even have to go talk to a human being. You can actually have it delivered to your home. Healthcare, astronomically changed. COVID has forced us to think and look at the world around us in a different way. Tennessee institutions need to be in a place where we're more adaptable and responsive to feeding the shifting labor market, as well as supporting the students to complete degrees in a timely fashion. This shifting market needs and requires transformative changes at the institution level and across all different areas of our life. This affects core structures, beliefs, as well as operations for long-term sustainability in the information age. Our states need students who are prepared for the jobs of today and tomorrow. And Tennessee Higher Education Commission plays an important role in coordinating across the institutions, across state government leaders, and across external partners. There's a critical role and a critical need for a central strategy and a vision to align higher education policy in Tennessee, and THEC fills that role. Today we're going to talk about next steps on the executive director search, which is an integral part in the work that we're doing here, as well as tuition ranges. We'll hear from UT about a couple of campus growth plans. We'll learn more about Blue Oval City, and we'll also learn some about the recent legislative session that's closed, among other things too. With that, our first action item is the consent agenda. There are 2 items on the consent agenda, and without objection, we will vote on them as a set. If there are no questions or objections, I will entertain a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Any further discussion on the consent agenda? Okay, with no objection, we'll take a roll call vote. Madam Secretary.
Chairwoman Scarlett,
Aye.
Commissioner Allman,
Aye.
Commissioner Kingsolver,
Aye.
Commissioner Coben, Commissioner Matlock, Commissioner Moser,
Aye.
Commissioner Stafford,
Aye.
Commissioner Wharton,
Aye.
Commissioner Winton, Secretary Hargett, Treasurer Lillard,
Aye.
Comptroller Mumpower.
Aye.
Chairwoman, you have 12 ayes.
Thank you. Well, we'll move on to the regular calendar. So the first part on regular calendar is the 23-24 binding tuition and fee ranges. It's going to be presented by Ms. Crystal Collins, there you are, who's Senior Director of Fiscal Policy. Ms. Collins, you are recognized.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to stand before you. Let's see here, to discuss the setting of the binding tuition and fee ranges for fiscal year 23-24. As you will recall, every year this body meets to review tuition and mandatory fee levels at the fall and spring commission meetings, with the statutory requirement to set binding ranges for in-state undergraduate students for our universities, community colleges, and colleges of applied technology. Today's conversation, however, is going to be a little different than we've had in previous years. Because instead of staff coming to you with one recommendation, what we're coming forward with today is an opportunity for a discussion where we will be presenting in-depth information on the current affordability and revenue needs for our students and institutions to facilitate that discussion on 3 staff-identified range options, with the ultimate goal of the Commission identifying and approving a binding tuition range and a binding tuition and fee range today. With that in mind, I wanted to just briefly start this morning with a reminder of the statutory responsibilities before the Commission in this agenda item. Tennessee Code Annotated 497202 describes the Commission's tuition setting authority. First, the Commission is tasked with reviewing tuition and other fees and approving a binding tuition and fee policy for in-state undergraduate students, at least annually. Second, you will be approving 2 ranges today, one for tuition and one for combined tuition and mandatory fees. The law does not allow for differentiated ranges for different institution types, so that tuition range must affect all community colleges, TCATs, and universities. That tuition and fee range is for all community colleges, TCATs, and universities. By adopting binding tuition and combined tuition and fee ranges, the Commission is authorizing institutions to adopt any fee within the range set, including below the minimum should they so choose. So if you were to set your minimum at 0% and an institution wanted to go negative, they would not be precluded from doing that. And finally, any tuition and fee policy must be mindful of financing agreements between institutions and the School Bond Authority, and this is related to debt service for bonded projects. So before making tuition and fee policy recommendations to the Commission, THEC staff consider a panoply of factors. These factors were examined last fall before the guiding range was approved by this body in November. In preparation for this meeting, THEC staff revisited these considerations to inform the 3 policy options included in your materials today. These considerations include various financial indicators, like current tuition and fee levels compared to national and regional peers, the total cost of attendance, including the average net price that students can expect to pay after financial aid is considered, average debt levels, and the inflationary pressures affecting both our institutions and their staff, as well as students and their families. We also examine past and predictive future enrollments, and lastly, we consider the level of state support provided by the legislature. You might recall this slide that my colleague Russell Van Zomeren presented in November of last year when we were setting the guiding range, looking at total revenue in fiscal year 2022 of $3.3 billion. Again, that was made up of $1.4 billion in state appropriations, $1.9 billion in tuition revenue. We considered the September Core Consumer Price Index, which is the CPI less food and energy costs. And at that time, it was 6.3%, and used a predicted flat enrollment for our universities, community colleges, and TCATs to determine that an additional $200 million would be needed for our institutions to maintain their revenue per FTE that they received in FY22. In an effort to prioritize affordability at that time, THEC staff recommended that state funding account for about 3/4 of this revenue need at $150 million, while tuition revenue would account for the remaining 50. This $50 million was equivalent to about a 0 to 3% tuition range, with most institutions falling in the middle. They're around 2%. In April, the legislature passed a budget that included $112 million in new recurring appropriations for these undergraduate serving institutions. This represents the second largest single-year investment ever in these units, trailing only last year's investment of $137 million. So in the last 2 years, these units have received $250 million new recurring dollars from the state. With this investment, that leaves our institutions with an estimated $88 million need in tuition revenue to account for the full effects of inflation that we used in our tuition model. This represents about $38 million more than we estimated at the $50 million level in November, and equates to about an additional 2.5% increase in tuition and fees, which would mean that the suggested range at 3% that we saw in November, the data tells us might need to be as high as 5.5 in order to make up that revenue difference. So now that we know what the estimated remaining financial need is for our institutions, I wanted to spend a little time discussing the factors we consider when identifying a recommended tuition and fee range to assist you as you work today to determine the best binding range for 23-24 for our institutions. First, let's look at the tuition and fee levels for an in-state student at a community college or an in-state student at a university. A couple caveats on this data before we get too far into it. So this information was pulled from the U.S. Department of Education's College Scorecard, which, as our chairwoman knows, is a wealth of information on higher education, especially funding policies. But because of this national implication, the most recent data that is currently available right now is 2021. And that might seem old, and it is a little old. We've had 2 more fiscal years since this data was collected. The good news for Tennessee is one of those years we instituted a less than 2% tuition increase and the other was 0%. So these averages, once we get out to 21-22, are going to look very similar. So we're not hiding a spike here anywhere because that data isn't available. Additionally, these data are weighted by undergraduate degree-seeking students, so the number of students that attend that type of institution. And that is to better reflect the average student experience in each category. What this means for Tennessee and why this is important is the University of Tennessee, Knoxville serves 22,000 undergraduate students, and they charge about $13,000 a year in tuition and fees. So that has a larger impact on that university number than, say, Tennessee State University, who in 2020 was serving 5,300 students and was only charging $8,000. So because there were more students at UT Knoxville, that average is a little bit higher because it incorporates a larger value for the average student in Tennessee, since more students were attending Knoxville. For students at our community colleges, tuition and fees increased about $300 between 17 and 2021. This is not adjusted for inflation, so those are real dollars. This equates to less than 1.5% annually in increase, and at our 4-year institutions, tuition and fees for in-state students have increased about $1,000 over that same 5-year period, which is about a 2% increase annually. Now, of course, not bearing the lead here, in both cases, Tennessee is above national and regional averages for the total cost for tuition and fees. But what is interesting is Tennessee has a very robust financial aid system. We're the 9th largest in the country, which is impressive. And because of that, our net price is actually pretty good for our students. And so what net price is looking at is the sticker price, which is that number that you see cost of attendance, which you often see is in the $20,000 range, $20,000 to $25,000. That's the sticker price. Very few students actually pay that. What they do pay is the net price, which is that value, so cost of attendance, tuition fees, housing, dining, books, all of that less financial aid that they receive from either federal, state, or institutional sources. And so what that gets us to is net, the net price, which offers a better look at what average students are paying out of pocket on an annual basis. So while average tuition and fees showed our 2-year institutions outpacing both regional and national peers, net price shows us that our community college students are generally paying less out of pocket once robust financial aid programs like Promise and Reconnect are taken into account. Additionally, while the net price for the average Tennessean attending one of our universities does still outpace national and regional peers, the difference is smaller than in the average tuition and fee level, and this is an indication that state and institutional financial aid is working to offset the cost of college. When last we spoke about tuition in November, we reported a core CPI of 6.3%. Core CPI on this graph is the red line. We commented at the time that the country was experiencing the highest inflation seen in nearly 40 years, with no indication of waning. Since then, CPI has started to decline, with the most recent report, which was released earlier this week, showing CPI, total CPI at 4.9%, which is that blue line, and then core CPI at 5.5%. However, even with this new report, institutions and families are still facing historic inflationary pressures on their budgets. As you can see, looking as far back as 2009, we were averaging less than 2% on inflation pretty much every year until the two most recent. As you think through the effects of inflation on institutions and families, it might be useful to also compare average increases in tuition and fees for Tennesseans. Here, we've taken the previous slide and added a gray line showing the average change in tuition and fees associated with the inflation levels that inform these ranges. Of note on this slide, the dotted line in the middle indicates when binding authority was assigned to the commission. So you can see that since that binding authority was assigned, tuition increases have been very moderate. From 2009 through 16, average increases in tuition and fees outpaced CPI, and in some years, these tuition increases were more than double CPI. Since 17, when the commission gained binding authority, average changes in tuition and fees have been at or below inflation, including last year when the commission set a binding range of 0% when inflation was 4%. As I mentioned earlier, this action also corresponded with the largest single-year investment of operating dollars in higher education from the state. So the question before you today is, what will the binding tuition and fee range be with the second highest state investment, but higher in sustained historic inflation? So, with that in mind, as outlined here on this graph and in your materials, staff have identified 3 possible options for binding range action. First, the commission could choose to recognize the additional funding identified by the tuition model needed to maintain revenue per FTE under a 6.3% inflation factor and with a partially funded 5% salary file by setting a binding range of 0 to 5.5%. Option 2 would prioritize affordability for all students by making the previously approved guiding range of 0 to 3 the binding range for all institutions. Finally, option 4 presented here would set a option 3. We're going to talk about 4 in a second. Option 3 would set a maximum somewhere between 3% and 5%. This would allow for some flexibility for institutions and would acknowledge that the state funding recommendation approved by the commission in November was not fully met, while also recognizing that inflation pressures are affecting both institutions and students and their families. Now we get to option 4, which is to say, of course, you can do whatever you want, quite honestly. You can, as always been the case, you, the commission, are empowered to set any binding range that you choose. Your action today is only limited to the 4 statutory requirements presented at the beginning, and outside of that, it is entirely up to you. So this concludes my presentation. I am available to answer any questions, but I will turn it back over to the chairwoman.
Thank you, Ms. Collins. What sort of questions does anyone have? I'd like to, rather than moving directly into a motion, I'd like for us to have more robust discussion about our options here. Commissioner Matlock?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Walk me back to the illustration that you gave us. You said that the cost was $20,000, as in you were comparing the sticker price to the net price. That number is the cost that you would presume to educate a child, is it 20,000?
So yes, sir. So that's the average cost of attendance. So that includes everything. You as a commission only have purview over tuition and fees. But the cost of attendance includes housing, it includes dining, so room and board, it includes books, other non-mandatory fees like lab fees, parking fees, other things that or that students would be required to pay for in order to attend an institution.
If I were a taxpayer in the state, had no child in college, help me understand what my cost is to contribute to the education of a Tennessee student.
So your cost to contribute to the education of a Tennessee student is the state appropriation that is provided to that institution. And generally, the state provides for universities about 40% of total revenue, probably a little less than that, depending on the institution. And then for community colleges, right about 50%, and then for TCATs, about 75%. So if you're a university, you're only receiving, and let's say that you're charging a student $25,000, only about 40% of that is being funded at the maximum by a state taxpayer. And it's probably much less than that.
So if I'm a taxpayer compared to a taxpayer with no children in college compared to a taxpayer with a child in college, you mentioned that we have I think you said, robust
Financial aid system, yes, sir.
financial aid.
Yeah.
That, of course, has a cost attached to it as a taxpayer.
Well, most of our financial aid is paid through the lottery. Outside of that, we do have the Tennessee Student Assistance Award, which is the only thing that is state funded. That's about $113 million, and that goes directly to low-income students.
Cost.
Yes, sir. So that $113 million would also be included in that.
Lottery, you would point out, is arbitrary. You can choose to participate.
Right, yes.
In that.
Yeah,
in
and
that-
those scholarships, Promise, Reconnect, Hope, are funded by the lottery revenue, which a person chooses to participate in. Yes, sir.
Ms. Collins, just help me understand the operational application of the maximum of 3.5 to 5.5, or I think 3 to 5.5.
Yes. So that option 3, sir? Yeah, so option 3, what we're recommending here as a possibility is to set a range of, say, 0 to 3.5 or 0 to 4. So not holding at the guiding range that we set in November, but also not going fully to that 5.5%. And what that movement would do is provide some additional flexibility for some of our institutions that are maybe having some revenue pressures, either due to declining enrollment or inflationary pressures, or just not being able to cut costs enough to maybe get where they need to be to fully fund their enterprise.
So operationally, do we set a percentage within that
Yes.
range?
So you would need to set whatever the maximum is. So the range that you would approve today, let's say you wanted to make a motion and say that I move that we set a range for tuition of 0 to 3.5%. So you need to identify what that range looks like. Yep.
Commissioner Kingsolver, you are recognized.
Do we know about specifically like the lottery revenue? You talked about that being arbitrary. Have we seen the revenue stream for that, whether it increase, decrease, or has it been relatively stagnant?
Thank you for the question. So during the pandemic, I mean, as many of you will recall, Powerball really did a lot for us with the lottery revenue in the last year or so. The lottery revenue picture is good for us. In fact, I believe we did have some changes to lottery scholarships in the last 2 years to increase lottery funding available to our students who are attending our universities. We're so very close to fully funding Tennessee Promise so that it is solvent on its own, and that is being backfilled by additional lottery revenue. So to answer your question, Commissioner, yes, it's been very robust the last couple of years, and we feel that that's a good source of revenue right now for our financial aid programs.
Thank you very much.
Hi there. I have a series of questions, so forgive me in advance for my long series of questions. But the first one that I have is in regards to the enrollment data, just thinking about outcomes for our universities. So how many students do we have enrolled and how many do we have actually graduating? Because when we all have to face members of the Tennessee General Assembly, they're saying, like, what are your outcomes? We want to see outcomes before we can go in and improve, tuition increase. We should probably know, like, what we're getting in for what we're putting out.
Sure, absolutely. So generally, I'll speak about enrollment first. Generally, enrollment, our universities are relatively flat. So if you were to look 10 years ago, we were serving about 100,000 students in our universities. It's about the same right now. So there was a dip during COVID, and I'm speaking specifically about undergraduate students because that's really what we're talking about today for tuition purposes. For our community colleges, it's a little more challenging recently. They've seen double-digit declines in their enrollment post-COVID, so since 2020. And, as we know, the college-going rate has been declining also since COVID. We had a pretty significant bump when Promise was instituted. Free college is a very powerful thing to get students to want to go to college. But the pandemic did, and quite honestly, a robust economy since then has kept a lot of students out of college and have not enrolled in our 2-year system in the way that we would like. I know that THEC is working on that through a momentum year in partnership with our institutions. And so we have hope, but this is why we used a flat enrollment predictor for the purposes of this model. Related to outcomes. So the interesting thing about the outcomes formula is while we do only solely measure outcomes, by definition they are affected by enrollment because you can't graduate more students if you have fewer students to serve necessarily. Unless we pejoratively or jokingly say you either get bigger or you get better. So some of our institutions have gotten better as they've gotten smaller. And so as most recently as 21-22, which is the most recent outcome data that we have, our community colleges produced more associate degrees than they did the year before, so they're still doing that. And our universities are still producing a high number of bachelor's degrees, tens of thousands, I think. However, to your question on graduation rates specifically, while we are seeing increases in graduation rates, I think our average university graduation rate is in the high 40s right now, 40s to 50%, and that's the 6-year graduation rate. Our highest performing institution is in the 80s. There's still opportunity for growth here. And I think there's a real opportunity for our institutions to provide an ROI to students that gets them through college faster. So that's still something that our institutions can work on.
Thank you. That's helpful. I can hear Senator Bo Watson in my ear saying, like, well, what are your outcomes? You have to have outcomes. We can't spend all this money, blah, blah, blah.
So you've been in my nightmares too. So you know exactly what's happening. Yes,
yes, absolutely. So my next question is kind of outside of the scope of, you mentioned a little bit of inflation, talking about inflation, but when we think about the looming activities that are occurring nationally, whether you're thinking about bank failures or any particular recession or anything like that, how do we make sure that the universities are prepared for those rainy days when we know that they're going to come?
Yes, and we had talked about this briefly in our one-on-one chat earlier. What I would say is one of the things that THEC does do in the fiscal policy officer, and my colleague Russell Van Zomeren oversees this, is we do collect financial health indicators from our institutions every year. And the most recent one that we've looked at, the Composite Financial Index, I am happy to report that every single one of our universities is above the highest level that they identify. So there's a watch level, there's a everything's great level, and everyone is above the everything's great level for all 7 measures. So that indicates to us that our institutions, all of them have enough cash on hand, they don't have, their debt ratio isn't too high, all these other indicators within the CFI. We also collect plant fund information, so we know what their reserves look like. And in our most recent allocation, or most recent collection, across the entire higher education enterprise, there was about $2 billion in reserves. Now, I will caveat that by saying, most of those are spoken for. So if you're an institution, you're a CFO on an institution's campus, and you're trying to think about the maintenance of your buildings, you know that you're going to have to pay for a boiler in 10 years. You're saving that money now, right? You know that you're going to need to buy or need to build a new building, ask the state for money in 5 years to build a building. Tennessee has a match requirement. So you're already saving that money so that you can meet your match requirement. So while that's a lot of money that's sitting in there, most of it has already been restricted or identified to be spent on a project. But it's good things, right? So they're thinking about deferred maintenance. They are saving money, and most of our institutions have about 2 to 5%. That's the industry standard, about 2 to 5% on hand in reserves, unrestricted, in order to be able to cover should there be a recession, which we've been talking about for a while, Treasurer Lillard. That is probably on its way.
Okay, my last question was in regards to, you had a chart on there, so thank you for having the state versus national data. So if you look at the four-year colleges, if we think about, if we do, let's say, a 5.5% rate increase, we're already above the national average and the regional average. What would make a student want to remain in Tennessee if we know that they're going to be paying more than what they'd be paying outside of the state of Tennessee?
So this is a great question. And one of the things that we looked at in preparation for this, I'll give you two pieces of information here. One of the things that we looked at in preparation for this was what other states around us are doing right now for tuition. And it is a bevy of possibilities, right? So you have some states like North Carolina and Florida that are always going to be zero no matter what. And what those institutions are facing is unfunded. So they're not getting any, it's not like the state is providing funding to allow them to afford that 0%, like we did last year, where we received enough money that institutions weren't having to make cuts, but could still hold tuition at 0%. They're making 7, 8, 9% cuts because tuition is being held flat. And other places, like Missouri is an example, where binding tuition authority is not held by, say, a coordinating board, institutions are being told to keep it at inflation. So try and, 5%, don't go crazy. And we're seeing institutions do 4.5, 4.9, 5. That's true in, Georgia is thinking right now, they're sort of in the same posture we are. They actually took a cut in their budget of about $66 million. So there's a possibility that they'll have to increase their tuition a little bit more than they were thinking. But all of that to be said, you're right, that students are going to be affected by any sort of tuition increase. I think the indication that we've gotten from institutions is that whatever revenue they generate here, they're going to do their best to keep that net price low. So what the best way to think about it would be that, yes, maybe a higher paying student, meaning a student who can afford to pay more, would pay that full 5.5% increase, which is about $550 on average more per year. The institution could repurpose that revenue to provide more in financial aid. So in academic terms, we think of Tennessee as a high cost, high aid state. So while our tuition and fee levels may be higher than our regional and national peers, we offset that, and the state does this and the institutions do this. We try and offset that as much as possible with as much financial aid as we can, either distributed based on merit, like the HOPE, or distributed based on need, like TSAA, Promise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One moment. Commissioner Kingsolver, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you talked about, our costs for education being kind of higher than national average and higher than regional average. What's our graduation rates looking like in the same spheres?
I think, Commissioner Kingsolver, you are after Commissioner Winton's heart by asking that question. I would say that I don't know off the top of my head, but I do think that we are either average on tuition compared to our peers or below. Or I'm sorry, average compared to our peers on graduation rate or below. As I said, I think we have an opportunity for some real growth, especially in on-time completion at our institutions. And quite honestly, Commissioner Kingsolver, tuition policy can have a lot to do with that. We have seen our UT institutions move to 15 to finish policies where they're charging for 15 credit hours regardless of the number that you take. Previously, they had only charged for 12. And it didn't really promote, can't complete in 4 years at 12 credit hours a semester unless you're also participating in summer school. So by moving to a tuition policy of 15 credit hours, you're indicating to the student that it should be 4 years of college, not 5 or 6. And that's something that this commission has voted on before to allow institutions to do.
Mr. Stafford?
Collins, I want to go back to the discussion about the cuts, and you provided some very helpful information in the pre-meeting materials. You alluded to potential options that universities, institutions might take if they don't get the full 5.5%. What do we know, or what do we surmise about where those cuts might impact most in terms of the personnel, whether it's some other capital ventures or what have you? What are the potential ramifications?
So in our conversations, we've spoken to every system, or I guess governing board CFO, right? So all 6 of our universities, the CFOs at the UT institutions, and then the CFO at TBR, to ask this very question. So where are your cost reductions going to come from? And some institutions aren't going to have to institute cost reductions. And they're going to do their very best to be able to fully fund that 5% salary increase. But for those that are thinking about cost reductions, to an institution, what we've heard is that they will do their very best to make sure it does not touch the quality of the education that is provided to students and the services that they receive. So when you're thinking about cost cutting, some institutions might do an across-the-board cut of 3%, and what that looks like is it can be something like no more travel, less time for research, movement from tenured faculty to more lecturers or adjunct faculty, where you are still providing classes to students, but not with maybe tenured faculty who have a tendency to require higher salaries. 80 to 85% of expenditures at our institutions are personnel-based. So any sort of cut is going to probably touch people, employees at the institution. But what we might see is reductions in student support services or other things like that. But I think it's fair of me to say that the institutions think of that as a sort of a last resort if possible. They don't want the student experience to be affected because, quite honestly, they need those supports to create outcomes to then receive state appropriations and provide educated citizens for
My opinion is we need to keep these cuts, these increases as low as we can. I have no doubt but and you just cited some examples that our costs are probably too high. And I think that needs to be, the universities need to take a hard look at that. I don't know any specifics. The other thing is, I wonder, enrollment's down across the state, and I wonder how increases will affect enrollment, and I don't know that. I don't have a clue about that. But that's one thing that I think it needs to be considered. The other thing is, and I don't think it's ever been mentioned, we're talking about giving the universities increases, but the families that have students going to school, inflation's affecting them too. And nobody's talking about that really, and I think that's important, and I think we need to keep that in mind.
Any other questions or discussion at this point? Then I'll entertain a motion if there's none.
Mentioned, and I think I heard this correct, that our graduation rate after 6 years was 40%.
Probably in the upper 40s, but yes. Upper 50s? Upper 50s, yeah. After 6 years, yes, sir.
We embedded in the thought process of our students that there's an unlimited time to get out of college?
I would say, no, I don't think that that is probably what they're being told. So that, the graduation metric is imperfect. It is only looking at first-time, full-time freshmen. So you create a cohort around, a cadre of students that show up. Life happens, as it does for all of us, and some students drop to part-time, and so it takes them a little longer. Some students leave and come back. Some students start at a community college and transfer. So that is not inclusive of everything that our institutions are doing. But I think it is a fair conversation to have, that there is definitely opportunity to promote faster completion for our students.
You said, I think, that the UT system was actually graduating the percentage,
Yes, they changed the way that they charge their students for college to promote
Why would the other
completion.
schools not do that likewise?
That's a great question. So they have those conversations with their boards, and what the LGIs do. I'm just speaking about the universities specifically. What we do have one LGI, Tennessee Tech University, did that in 2020, and the commission actually provided a special dispensation for them. They moved to a flat rate model. The University of Memphis moved to a guaranteed tuition rate model a couple of years ago. So some of them are stepping into that, and I think that our CFOs at our institutions are thinking innovatively about this, and you might see more of that in the future. I will say the binding tuition authority does make it hard to, can make it hard for some institutions to institute innovative tuition policies, because when you go from, say, only charging for 12 to charging for 15, that is technically a 25% increase in tuition because you're charging for 3 more hours. For our LGIs, it won't be quite as much because they're discounting those hours right now. They're charging for them, but at a discounted rate. But it would be outside of, say, a 3% tuition increase.
So anything we could do to incentivize a student to rapidly get through school. I have 3 children, and I incentivize them. After 4 years, the money's gone. They got out. They figured it out.
Is there anything the state can do for that? I think the outcomes funding formula is a good place to think about maybe instituting a policy that rewards institutions for on-time completion. Yes, sir, during the formula review process, you can make that recommendation to THEC staff.
Any other questions or discussion?
You looking for a motion?
I'm looking for a motion.
All right, so let's just start this way if I can. Great presentation.
Thank you, Trey.
And you know, I've been a long time advocate of keeping this at 0 if at all possible. I also recognize too that we've entrusted these boards. We've got a lot of high capacity, high powered people, really smart people who serve on these boards, and I think have to make hard decisions about what it takes to run the university, and at all levels, you know, whether it be TBR or UT or LGIs. So I'm going to try this, and if it fails, it fails. But I'm going to suggest that we set a range of 0 to 3% for the upcoming academic year.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay. Madam Secretary?
Chairwoman Scarlett,
Aye.
Commissioner Allman, Commissioner Kingsolver,
Aye.
Commissioner Coben, Commissioner Matlock, Commissioner Moser, Commissioner Stafford, Commissioner Wharton, Commissioner Winton,
Aye.
Secretary Hargett, Treasurer Lillard,
Aye.
Comptroller Mumpower. Chairwoman, you have 11 ayes.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ms. Collins. Before you leave, two things. One,
Ma'am.
I have a request in listening to this discussion today. And I'd like to understand and get an analysis from THEC, the funding needs by institution. Because it's just interesting, the type of questions we all have. It comes back to like, what is the actual need? I think also understanding what are the all-in costs for students for each institution. And I think there's probably a way to apply whatever the financial aid is available for different student types. I'd also request an understanding at a national and statewide level. What are the best practices that exist by institution type to increase on-time graduation rate for the 2-year and the 4-year schools? We're looking at 4 years. I don't remember what the average is that you said. 80%-ish. I know community college, I think, is around 30%. TCAT's around 75, 80%. I think that we can do better. And I think that we can learn from each other. So I'd like to understand that at a national as well as a local practices that can be shared.
Can I add a couple of things when?
Please.
Okay. I'd also, you had a really great slide on the all-in cost for tuition and fees, the net cost. I would love to see what debt at graduation looks like compared to national and SRE.
I can hand that to you right now, sir, but I'll be happy to share it with the rest of the commission.
Okay. No, thank you.
I actually pulled that information. I thought that might come up.
I was waiting the whole time.
I know, I'm so sorry.
The second thing that I'm wondering about, that goes to Commissioner Matlock's question, is, we're trying to incentivize students to get out in a certain amount of time. What if we set a certain number of hours that the state is going to support at a certain level, but after that, the student picks up the difference? Because the difference in funding at the state funding at a lower level, because we're funding let's say we're funding the first 120 hours or the
Right.
first 4 years of that, and if you don't get out by then, we're not going to continue to pick up the state portion of that, and also make it where the student picks up that I don't want to fall back on the university either, because I think the university is putting the structure in place. They are incentivized to get these students out, but at the same time, I don't want to see universities, and I keep saying universities generically, I shouldn't say it that way, institutions penalized because the students aren't motivated to get out in time. So we ought to figure out a way to really put a greater incentive on that student to get out of this, graduate.
Sir. And I'll just mention that our financial aid programs already do limit how many hours they'll pay for. So, but it is something to think about related to state appropriations outside of financial aid.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Allman. You wanted to put in your vote for the tuition and fee binding range?
I did. I apologize. I was trying to unmute my computer here and it was a delay. So I did. I was voting in favor.
So, Chairwoman, you now have 12 ayes on that vote.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I'd like to recognize Interim Director Dr. Bob Smith.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. We've had a magic moment here, so you know where this is going. I think all of the commissioners here, as well as everybody in the room, recognized what an extraordinary job Crystal did in not only the presentation, but in addressing the questions that come up and having the document just ready for you. I mean, that's impressive.
Well, I told her last night, I said, listen, I'm going to ask you.
It's a whole bit. We had a whole bit. It went well.
Yeah, somehow, pardon me, but I don't believe that.
You would be correct.
This all started in 2006 when two very insightful mentors, Russ Deaton and Brian Nolan, recognized in Ms. Collins that there was talent, and they brought her to THEC as an intern. And by the way, a number of our staff people began in internships, which is sort of the great way that the internship should work. But unfortunately, this is coming to an end with this presentation. Ms. Collins has accepted the position as the Chief Financial Officer for the Colorado system of higher education, and she is going to do great things in the Mile High City, and we are going to miss her terribly. I'd like you to join me in wishing Crystal well and thanking her.
No, you keep it now. I'll sign it later. I'll just say this opportunity is because I've worked here for 10 years. God, I'm crying. Jeez. This is the second time I've cried at a commission meeting. That's a running joke. I cried when I asked for. Yeah, I know. I cried when I asked for money for emergency grants one time. I don't know what that was about, but I relish the opportunity to go out to Colorado and help them. But I know that if I'm any good at it, it's because of all of you. So, thank you.
Next, we have the long-awaited discussion about our executive director search, and I would like to recognize Lou Hanneman, Chief of Staff, who will provide an overview of the process thus far. Mr. Hanneman, you are recognized.
To follow that. So the executive search, where are we and how did we get here? If you'll recall, back in December, we did establish a search committee, and that search committee was charged with coming up with a process by which we would figure out who our next executive director, permanent executive director would be, and what the timeline for that process and how that would play out. The search committee did meet, came back in January with some recommendations which were approved by the commission, and on February 10th, the job description for the position was rolled out, both through the Department of Human Resources with the state, but also through a number of venues outside the Chronicle of Higher Education, Inside Higher Education, and others. In that intervening period, we did have some 40 or so candidates submit their name for consideration. In the final analysis, the pool was not deemed sufficient ultimately to move forward with final interviews or a finalist type category of candidates. And so where we are today is you really have a significant decision before you about what is the next steps for that search process. We are in somewhat of a suspended state at the moment because we, again, don't have interviewees for you today. I think that also before you, and this did play out during conversations with some of the candidates as to why perhaps some of them pulled out, are salary considerations. And I think, and I have kind of interacted with many of you, and the conversation around where that salary should be, could be, is, I think, a discussion certainly worth having. So I think in the end, you're really facing two discussion points here, which may or may not lead to a decision. One, around the next steps, and two, if you do move forward with a search of some type, should there be a salary consideration moving forward? Madam Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Hanneman. I appreciate that. And I'll give a little bit of context. When we formed the search committee in January, we chose at that time to not hire a search firm, to expand our wings and find, through all of our networks, to find candidates who might be the right fit for this role. And I can tell you, I spent countless hours on the phone talking with people across the states and at a national level. I had other people that were helping us do that on the outside too. Just how can we use our networks to create these connections? Unfortunately, when it came down to it, the search committee was presented with, if I remember correctly, 14 viable candidates, and it was selected down from there to a lower number. In the end, it became such a low number that it didn't seem right for us to bring only 2 candidates to the search committee, because we believe And certainly I believe that this is a extraordinarily important role for our state, and we need to have a wide range of candidates to select from that fit this role in the best possible way. So as disappointing as that was, we're at a reset moment or a pause moment. And there's two things that I think are very important for us right now. Is number one, we need to decide whether we're going to hire a search firm or not. Number two, we need to talk about the salary range. Outside of that, not having executive director in role, permanent executive director in role, I don't believe that this should stop us being able to have a broad conversation among ourselves, with our state relations conversations, with our institutions, to talk about the direction the state's going when it comes to our vision and our strategy. With that conversation starting next month, my hope is that whoever comes into this role will be able to hit the ground running and continue this mission and vision that we have begun to step forth. So with that, I'd love to open up a conversation about, or even a motion for that matter, on the idea of putting out an RFP for a search firm to find our future executive director. Commissioner Coben?
Commissioner Scarlett, back in January, we were told that it might take as long as 4 months or so to work through the process with the RFP in order to hire a search firm. However, what I've heard since then is there is a possibility to fast track this. What would the timeline be if we did that, and why couldn't we do this in January?
I'd like to recognize Mr. Sloan.
Thanks, Chairman Coben. So we will be going through a state procurement process, and the estimate that we provided you in January is absolutely true. There are mandatory time periods built in. I can tell you that my staff has all of those documents ready to go today, and with the Commission's approval, we can submit those to CPO. We've had some conversations, very initial conversations, about just requesting that on their side that this is expedited as quickly as possible, and they've been very receptive to that. So we all recognize the urgency. I can tell, I'll commit to this now on the timetable. Worst case scenario, not getting anything expedited, we would be able to have, we think, that contract signed with that search firm, assuming the bids are there, on or before July 11th. But there may be an opportunity, if we're able to expedite some of the steps here, that it could be a little bit sooner.
Yes.
So it seems to me that we've lost 5 months going the route that we have. It also seems that the only real deterrent is the cost of hiring a recruitment firm. So I would make a motion that we hire a recruitment firm to go move forward. Given what Mr. Sloan just said about the potential to speed the process up, I think we've tried to overcome any particular obstacles there might be to getting us qualified executive director within a short period of time.
Second that motion.
Secretary.
Chairwoman Scarlett,
Aye.
Commissioner Allman,
Aye.
Commissioner Kingsolver,
Aye.
Commissioner Coben, Commissioner Matlock,
No.
Commissioner Moser,
Aye.
Commissioner Stafford,
Aye.
Commissioner Wharton, Commissioner Winton, Secretary Hargett,
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard,
Aye.
Comptroller Mumpower. Chairwoman, you have 11 ayes and 1 nay.
Thank you all. Yes, please.
Let's go on and announce the vote finished. I have just a question of Lou there, if it's
Please,
in order.
yes.
If you'll recall, during our one-on-one with you, I observed, and I observed at this time, our challenge has not been finding executive directors, it's been keeping executive directors. You're still a leader, Madam Chair, in higher education. I can think of so many areas in which Tennessee has led the nation. Formula funding, all of those things. We have been the model cost control, and everything. And one of the things that enabled us to do that was the continuity in one of the most critical positions in this state. I was thinking on our previous discussion about how do we incentivize our students to get out. Higher education cannot do that alone. This is going to have to be a statewide. I think employers who are giving time off, there's so many other policies that we can't just drop this thing on higher education and say, y'all get them out of there. There's a way to go to the private sector and to encourage employers to give greater amount of time off. The more rapid your progress, the more time the employer allows you to take off to get it over. Similarly, when it comes to hiring, retaining executive directors, do we have the options that the private sector has in terms of contracts in which they're tied to benchmarks, in addition to if you leave before X date, you don't get this bonus? How much, we've got to run this, we're competing with the private sector, oddly not. Educators are not restricted to working in a college or university. Our major corporations are hiring chief education officers throughout, so their field is much broader. How do we, once we get a director in here, how do we keep her or him in that position?
Well, I think you raised an issue that state government faces just generally, which is the loss of highly qualified persons to the private sector who can both pay more and also provide, benefits maybe that public service does not. Of course, it doesn't provide the option to do public service as well. The Higher Education Commission executive director serves at the will of the commission. And as such, we've never had a contract relationship with that person. I would defer certainly to Scott on kind of the technical boundaries that we might have. But I think that in the main, that is the reason why we've never had a contract, or performance bonuses and so forth. I think in most recent memory, we did have a performance plan for the executive director that then perhaps went to inform salary increases above and beyond, the state salary increase. But in terms of a specific retention bonus or some type of contractual relationship, we've never contemplated such, and I'm not sure we can actually do it even if we wanted to.
And the answer no at the SCU. Anything else we can do? One of the way we kept presidents in place is that get appointments to corporate boards. Have we looked at other methods of, again, I bet you we can hire somebody Monday morning, but how do we keep them? Here's what we'll pay you. And do they get a little state car?
They do have a state vehicle, not a convertible as was implied several months ago, but it is a state vehicle.
Seriously, I do hope in this enterprise that not only do we go out and look for suitable candidates, but we look at a broader policy of talent in here and keep out of all things where we have a lot of turnover. This is one where to formulate and really execute on a sound, cutting-edge educational policy. I mean, the state of Tennessee is known for fiscal soundness, all of those things, but I'd like to see us resume the reputation of being the leader when it comes to higher education. State leader, we've got to have the right professional leadership in these top positions, and obviously our present model is not accomplishing that. That at some point in time we give some consideration to not only how do we hire a search firm to get somebody in here, but how do we keep them in here.
Thank you, Mayor Wharton. Commissioner Kingsolver, you have a question? You're recognized.
Thank you. So before I ask anything, I just wanted to comment on Commissioner Coben on specifically my reasoning for not wanting to go through a search firm was because being appointed to that search committee, my term ends at the end of June, and otherwise, if we had gone through the search committee, that or the private company, that decision would have happened past the expiration of my term. So it was my reasoning, but since unfortunately it didn't work out for us, I think going for a private search organization is definitely the better end. And I think the mayor has made some very good points, and would just like to ask, do we feel like going through a private search group? Because I know one of the the potential issues that we ran into is there were people who didn't want their current employer to know that they were applying for this position. Do we feel like that should yield us some higher quality candidates?
Well, I'll just take a quick stab at that. One of the obstacles that we ran into, and I think we knew this on the front end, and I'd be remiss if we didn't thank Dr. Brian Nolan and Dr. Keith Carver and Dr. Russ Eaton for their insights. And one of the things that they mentioned, early and often, was the unveiled nature of our search process is going to keep out a number of significant candidates. And we don't have some of the luxuries that, say, institutions have to put some of that behind the curtain, if you will. And so, but again, we're very candid about that on the front end. It was built into our job description, so nobody was confused about that. But it is a very real thing that we missed out on a couple of candidates, even there at the very end, viable candidates because of that. I think going with the search firm, depending on their charge and how far down the process that they are, charged to go, some of those early stages can be somewhat veiled. But whether that, provides us a greater pool or not, I think remains to be seen.
Coben?
Scott, let me ask you, I love what Lou just said. So if a search firm goes out and contacts people, at that point, we don't have to display those names. It's only perhaps when we cull the list and come up with our serious considerations, I guess I would say. Is that when we have to go public?
Let me say this as an overall response, that this remains a state government position, and the processes involved demand transparency. They're depending on some of the early efforts that for example, a search firm might, do some initial vetting. Is that subject to the requirement of an open meeting for that interview? It would not be, because no one on this board would be participating at that level. Caveat to that, of course, all of the email correspondence and everything that is engaged with between the agency and that search firm, most of it's going to be a public record and accessible.
Okay,
I hope that answers your
so
question.
basically from the get-go. I want to also comment on something that Commissioner Wharton brought up, and that is salary. I think we do need to give some serious consideration to the salary package for this job, because it's not just that we lose people to private industry, which is a state government issue, but from THEC, they can just go down the street and work for Dr. Tidings and double their salary. And shoot, I would work for Dr. Tidings for half of my salary. I would love to work for Dr. Tidings, but that's something we have to consider. We lose our people to ourselves. And so I strongly recommend we take a serious and academic look at our salary and compensation package for this position, and I love the creative ideas that Commissioner Wharton just came up with. We have 2 months. If Scott's estimation on the RFP is correct, July 11, we have 2 months. Let's get to work. Let's set up a small subcommittee and let's start getting a good recommendation on salary package.
Secretary Hargett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, Commissioner Wharton, as always, brings up some good points. And one of the things he mentioned was that people in higher education go to the private sector. They're not prohibited from doing that. When I read our job posting, though, it certainly feels like we're giving a Heisman to anybody in the private sector who might want to come interview for the job. And doesn't really reach out that, and not to put too big a hat on somebody, but I mean, we got one of the best higher education leaders that our state's seen in a long time, sitting about 2 rows back over here in Randy Boyd, who didn't come from higher education. And so I really think we need to be thinking broader. We ought to be thinking about CEOs, COOs, and presidents and vice presidents in corporate America, people who have successfully run enterprises. Because I'm looking for leadership. I'm looking for someone who knows how to run an operation. I'm looking for someone who has the ability to navigate the pitfalls of the Cordell Hall building in the state capitol. We need those things. And I want somebody who has a passion for higher education. I mean, our state cannot succeed without someone who cares about the things we talked about earlier and we're going to continue to talk about. But I want us to think, if we're going to think outside the box, I really think we need to be thinking broader about our pool and not just thinking we have this subset of higher education, people with higher education experience, and that's all that matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Luckily, you're on the search committee, so you can continue with that mission. I don't disagree with you. I want to go back to what Mayor Wharton was saying earlier about the compensation packets. I would love, and it could be the search firm that we request of this, but compile out-of-the-box thinking for a compensation package outside of salary, which we'll discuss in a second, and also retention package. What is being done across the SHIOs, across the state, the country, and what are there other ways for us to think outside of the box we have to live in the government world? I think that's there are other things that I think that we could be doing. The question is, what is that? So maybe we can have a search firm focus on it. Maybe we can ask someone of SHIO to help us understand what else is happening across the nation. You bring up the salary piece. We do need to make some sort of decision on salary today. It'd be beneficial, although we'll probably have additional ads in regards to a broader compensation or retention package in the future. We can talk about that. However, as we're engaging with a search firm, we do need to provide them a understanding of what this role would be paid. Currently, if I'm not mistaken, it's $230,000. As of July 1, it goes up to $241,000. Many of you have had conversations with Mr. Hanneman in regards to potential ranges or numbers. I'd love to welcome a motion on what that number might be.
Number?
Or a range. We can have a conversation.
Okay. I would hesitate until we do a study, till we do some homework on that.
Madam Chair, I think the difficulty with that, I have seen the numbers and I do recall seeing the ranges. I think if we go too high, then we risk butting up against constitutional officer salaries and even the governor's salary. And so I think we need to have more of a conversation before we can offer an amount.
So there has been the ranges that were provided in advance of this, at least for the search committee. I don't know how much broader that was. And we can start with that if it makes sense. I don't know if you have those numbers with you. I do not.
So in our discussions, and we did send out some documentation from SHIO and from, primarily from SHIO regarding salary ranges and averages across the country. I think if you looked at the SREB, the average was about $309,000 for a similar type role and a similar type coordinating board. I think in the discussions, some of the ranges, it really did range from about 250 or so all the way up to 300. And that was, again, that's a pretty significant range in and of itself. But I think that the universal acknowledgement was that the current salary is probably insufficient to draw the type of caliber candidate we were looking for initially.
What would be the issue with having a motion approved here today that authorizes you as chair to appoint a committee of the board to act on this issue of a proposed salary package for the candidate?
and to bring that back to the commission at a specially called virtual meeting in the whatever, we'll leave the time frame open so that you as chair and that committee can work with the search firm if that's necessary, whatever it may be. We'll just leave that open, but I would make such a motion at this point.
Second.
Accept an amendment that if we salaries, that we make the case for that salary. And in that, with folks in state government, don't simply bring it back here. If you're going to put something on the table, let's be able to say, and this is why. I don't want us to get into a two-step process.
That's a good point, Mayor, and I would hope that our chair and Lou as the chief of staff would work that issue, you know, after the committee gets something in mind in terms of where it's headed, et cetera. And so when it comes back to the board, it's a fully cooked and vetted issue, you know, is what it should be at that point in time.
As someone who seconded the motion, I thought that was what you were implying that we would do, but
I think the
it's good
mayor's
to be
got a
said.
good point. It's
That's all
good for
right,
him to
as long as
highlight
it's the
that.
sense of the body, that's fine. I will accept the well-stated intentions of.
Well, I appreciate that. Why don't we leverage the search committee that's already been formed to be that body? And we will convene appropriately and come back to the commission with a broader recommendation in writing. Would you mind taking the roll? Thank you.
Chairwoman Scarlett,
Aye.
Commissioner Allman, Commissioner Kingsolver,
Aye.
Commissioner Coben,
Aye.
Commissioner Matlock, Commissioner Moser,
Aye.
Commissioner Stafford, Commissioner Wharton,
Aye.
Commissioner Winton, Secretary Hargett,
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard,
Aye.
Comptroller Mumpower.
Aye. Commissioner. Go ahead.
I can be on the list after you, if that's okay.
Very well.
I take it this committee reports back, there's a sense of urgency here. How long are they gonna work? When are they?
This would be my proposal, is that this group will work together to get the appropriate information and the recommendation back to the commission. We'll have a specially called virtual meeting. I'm guessing in probably early June. I think it depends a little bit on how the RFP process goes. But my expectation is we'll do this in early June.
Thank you.
Yes,
Madam
sorry.
Chair and fellow members, the State Building Commission is about to convene, and I'm going to have to ask to be excused, I think, along with my colleagues from the constitutional offices. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, good thought by you.
I will note as we're closing out this section that interim director Dr. Bob Smith has graciously agreed to remain with us in the interim basis through November, if not before. So thank you very much. I think it's the if, hopefully before is what Bob is hoping for.
Yeah, I think it's clear that there's a best used by date for me.
Next, we'd like to recognize the University of Tennessee Knoxville Master Plan will be introduced by Alan Bolton, Interim Senior Vice Chancellor for Finance and Administration, and then presented by Jessica Leonard, Principal of Ayers St. Gross. Mr. Bolton, Ms. Leonard, you are recognized.
Right, good morning, and thank you for allowing us to be here. On behalf of Chancellor Plowman, we really appreciate the opportunity to present the University of Tennessee Knoxville's master plan today. We're very proud of the effort put into this master plan and are really excited about the path that it lays out for our great university. The priorities identified here on your screen, connectivity, growth, research, sustainability, and a focus on strengthening the volunteer experience helped guide the development of a plan that promotes the university's strategic vision over the next 10 years and is tied to the principles associated with being an R1 land-grant flagship university. A key to developing this master plan was the support of Ayers St. Gross and its team of professionals. I'm going to turn this presentation over to Jessica Leonard now. Ms. Leonard is a principal with Ayers St. Gross. She specializes in campus planning for large R1 land-grant universities, and has been a really invaluable partner in this important planning process.
Alan, and really excited to be here on behalf of our large consultant team to give this presentation. And as Alan said, the about 16-month process was rooted in these principles that reflect not only the strategic plan, but our early analysis of the opportunities and challenges that the physical campus presents in order to fulfill the mission of the university. And so I love that the Chancellor often speaks of UT Knoxville as a university on the rise and working across the country, and we just had a great presentation on enrollment and tuition. The flagships really are increasing enrollment, and this is the trend for the Knoxville campus. And this plan in its 10-year horizon is anticipating growth at both the graduate and undergraduate level and an in-person enrollment increase of about a little over 8,000 students. So the plan needs to accommodate growth and simultaneously accommodate renewal of aging facilities. It is a very large campus, and 25% of the facilities are currently in poor condition. And then the interior spaces are really outdated to meet research, instructional, as well as workplace requirements today. So a big foundation of the plan was understanding the needs. So a space assessment was done for fall 2021, which was our baseline, as well as projections for fall 2030, taking into consideration that growth not only of students, but also the faculty and staff to support the faculty-student ratio, as well as research goals. The top part of this slide are based on the THEC guidelines of space requirements. The bottom half are other space categories that use our best practices and benchmarking for metrics across the country. You'll see in the fall 21, while the university is in relative balance, there are real needs in research, as well as STEM education spaces, and really the range of student-centered, so recreation, wellness, as well as study spaces. When you go to 2030, those needs are exaggerated by the growth in all of those areas, as well as additional support and athletic space needs. I will highlight that while the classrooms are in relative balance based on THEC guidelines, really when you think of best practices, the square foot per student within these rooms are very crowded, and they really do not support active learning. And so you'll see recommendations for enhanced active learning classrooms to meet the needs for the university and to hopefully increase those graduation rates that we talked about earlier as well. The other area that is not metric-based but was demand-based was looking at student housing. We know that is a big debate or issue across the country, is how much student housing. And so in this time frame, there's also a need to deliver 5,000 beds, that's about 3,000 net new, to not only increase the number of students on campus, but also provide better quality housing, and then monitor over time the surrounding market to determine if additional beds might be needed to meet the student housing. To meet those needs, by and large, that will be met through infill and renewal of the existing campus. But there are opportunities and requirements where certain uses might need to be off campus or would really benefit from partnerships with community or business stakeholders. And so for our institutional boundary, we have chosen a 1.5 mile radius that includes not only the existing property, but goes into downtown in really a really accessible area so that the university can be more nimble and fluid in meeting those needs through partnership or acquisition. And while the Fort Sanders and Maplehurst are in that boundary, the university does not intend to acquire any historic properties. But moving into the physical planning recommendations, there were 3 main drivers to support that volunteer experience. Creating interdisciplinary hubs for learning and research, expanding student life clusters, and really improving campus connections, as you can see in this illustration of an improved Joe Johnson Boulevard with enhanced and dedicated bike lanes and pedestrian to connect the UTIA part of campus back to the campus core. The overall framework, highlighting those areas in the purple, is those interdisciplinary clusters. You've got the Hill expanding what is already a really great resource in Circle Park, building off of the new Student Success Center at Melrose and the College of Business, and then arts and humanities really in the center part of campus, building off of the existing programs there, and then creating a more cluster at UTIA and then out at UT Research Park at Cherokee Farm. And then the student life clusters, while having room for expansion around Caledonia, also you can see moving east to really have a better integration of the student life living and learning experience, as well as being able to enhance connections to the river. So the areas with those blue dots are opportunities for physical connections through recreation and athletics, views through trails along the river's edge, as well as education and research opportunities. Expansion of east-west connections along Andy Holt all the way from downtown, all the way to the UT Research Park, and then north-south, which is really exciting, from Caledonia to Melrose, the Circle Park, and then being able to leverage planning in conjunction with the city for a bridge that would go to the south waterfront and really increase connectivity to the community for campus. As we think about implementation, there's a lot already underway, but as we think about the near-term 5-year plan, there is development, as you can see, really in every geographic area of campus through a series of new construction and then in the hatch, renovation. It really is balancing new and renewal. And the university will be seeking funding in multiple sources to meet these needs, from state funds, housing auxiliary, E&G, donor funds, and auxiliary funds. And I just wanted to highlight briefly the 5 state projects that will be requested for state funds. The new chemistry building. The number 2 is a new classroom and humanities building. The humanities are very dispersed across campus because of other projects. Bringing them together and starting to move the dial on those classroom needs will also vacate space on lower condition buildings on campus. New research for the health and behavioral sciences, which is a growing need on the edge of campus where it's easily accessible to the public. New STEM research from the Dabney Buehler site, which would be ability to do that from the chemistry building. And then finally, having more instructional space closer to the residence halls for a new instructional building along Andy Holt Avenue, which would really help activate that east-west corridor. The midterm allows to meet those 10-year demand numbers that we talked about. You'll see more development on the UTIA part of campus to meet the growing programs in the College of Ag, as well as additional research at the Cherokee Farm Research Park. Additionally, there are projects at the UTSI campus in Tullahoma as well in that midterm timeframe. The campus has capacity beyond those 10 years if it continues to grow, or other opportunities to meet housing if that continues to be a demand, as well as continued renewal and infill across different areas of campus. The plan also considered infrastructure needs related to transit, stormwater management, open space and placemaking, and one thing that was just so exciting for us to see the 10 years, how the campus has transformed from the last plan, really along Andy Holt in the core. And when you look at UTIA, it is very car dominant, and that really needs a hub. And so one of our transformations is creating a loop road so that this very car dominated central part of campus can be transformed to have a more pedestrian friendly environment, leveraging new construction, creating places for outdoor seating, classrooms, and engagement in that part of campus. So there's a series of sequences across campus for these types of transformations. In conclusion, the 10-year plan, it needs to be ambitious to really reflect the goals and mission of a university on the rise. And so there is significant renewal, just under $3 million for renovation and demolition to adjust those aging facilities, as well as new construction, just over $4 million to meet the needs, academic, research, athletics, as well as housing and student life. Are there any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. I loved the classroom discussion and making sure that you're thinking about how do you make the classroom experience a great thing. But the one thing that was missing that I didn't see in terms of the housing experience for the students is if you're thinking about, you know, as Knoxville grows, as the state of Tennessee continues to grow, I didn't see how that was accounted for in terms of meeting the student housing needs, because we know that as we get more students enrolled, there will be more more needs for housing, and whether or not they leave UT or, you know, these kids today, they tend to stay at home or in the student base much longer than, you know, when I was in college, I left probably in my second year to go and stay in off-campus housing. So you don't really have that as much anymore. And so I was just wondering if that's accounted for in terms of this plan.
Yes, so there is a plan in the near to midterm to provide 5,000 beds. There will be some through strategic leases to help with the bed count. The P3 development that is underway right now will be just over 2,000, and that will allow then the university to start renewing some of the aging facilities, Reese and Carrick, and then build new to be able to get to that 5,000 number. That will increase the on-campus housing by 3% of number of students, and really focusing on the highest risk, so the first-year students as well as students that have historically not been represented in higher education, and being able to make sure there is still upper division students so that you get that full living learning experience. And so we're confident that there is enough sites to meet that demand, as well as carefully our demand analysis looked at the surrounding Knoxville area of what is coming online, what are those price points to meet affordability, and the university can then decide if they need to accommodate more or slow down if it were that there was other markets. But that price point of affordability is a huge part of our analysis and assessment as well.
I may have missed the math. I thought earlier today we said that in 10 years, our attendance was about flat.
So that was across the UT system. UT Knoxville campus is growing. And so that expectation of 8,000 in-person students and a significant online growth is not inconsistent with what we're seeing for flagships around the country. And so this university will grow, while some of the regional campuses will be consistent or, in some cases, small decline.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
It just happens that you're up first here. We hear across the nation all of these we're overbuilt because we assumed that everybody goes downtown to a tall building and sits at a desk. It's not true. In terms of our long-range plans, are we building, are we looking at existing stock?
Great question. I could talk to you all day about that, but I'll be brief. So yes, the higher education is not immune to the same workplace considerations. I will say that we've found the needle is moving a little bit more for the staff and administrative positions than faculty. We'll continue to push, but you saw in the space needs the overage of office space. And that is due to, one, the space metrics historically were much larger, so there's a lot of older buildings with large offices. Those offices cannot easily be converted to research space, but there are ways to think about either divesting, reducing the amount, or thinking about how to convert that. But our metrics did take into account and have continued. I know the university is continuing to think of their workplace policy. And what we've found is that there should be a range of a workplace experience where some people do need a private office. Others need to be able to come to campus, have meetings, and have private areas for Zoom the same way students will if they're taking hybrid. And so I anticipate that there will continue to be less overall office, individual office, but the workplace amount of space, there will still be requirements. And the hardest part is that if you have an office tower, it can't necessarily be used for research needs, which is the greatest, but there are other opportunities. And so this plan very much considers divestment and thinking of our new buildings having a tighter metric related to workplace space.
I'm not picking on UT, I'm going to ask everybody.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's going to be of my generation of thinking about higher ed, how to solve aging facilities and the future of workplace. So it's a great question.
About 20 years ago, maybe longer, we studied online learning. And do we need all this space for library books? Do the floors have to have as much weight-bearing capacity? And we just said that'll never happen, and we just dropped it.
Yeah, I mean, I will say online learning does not negate physical space on campus. It's different types of space. It's really hybrid now. So you're in the classroom, but then you're also outside of the classroom and taking a Zoom class. We saw one of our first visits to campus, students outside on their computer, and it's noisy. And so creating those spaces, it's just the shift in the type of space. And that is something that the THEC guidelines will have to evolve, as all will, to reflect kind of the way space is used on campus in the future.
Mr. Matlock?
Thank you, Ms. Chair. There is a lot of conversation in Knoxville, but I don't see pictured here the bridge. Tell me what that does to a student in 5 years.
Yeah. So we had a lot of coordination. It is a partnership led by the city. So we had a lot of meetings, both with their design team as well as with the city on that. And it is a great opportunity. It will unlock the ability for students to live on that side of campus and be able to walk across. It enhances a game day experience to be able to go and have different amenities. The other thing, so I think it is going to change for the community engagement. It can also give more choice for students that cannot have to move their car and be able to live across, as well as expanding to opportunities for a more social environment as well. I would also say one of the biggest aha moments for us is the distance from the Hill to downtown is the same as the distance from the Hill to the student housing, but it feels a lot longer. And so creating safe, walkable, and bikeable areas is really critical. And I think we've enhanced that to downtown, and I think that bridge will do the same thing to help connect south.
Does UT or the state own properties that attach on the South Knoxville side where the bridge would land?
Yes, there was an amendment to expand that, and I do believe some of that acquisition is in process.
Yes, great question. UT's in the final stages of acquisition of the landing spot for the bridge now, and we are in conversations with the city, who is got an option on a property right adjacent to it.
So if we're looking 20 years out, potentially there could be some things happen there that would be incorporated into the main campus.
Absolutely, and it may not be 20 years, it might be sooner. And there's actually quite a bit of development on the east side of that property right now with residential development going on.
Second part of that question, the track that would be out Alcoa Highway, I guess what we call Cherokee Farm, what do we currently do there?
There is partnership and research. So there are some private entities that have space, as well as the university has interdisciplinary research space. And a lot of this plan was talking about what research is ideal to stay in the core, and then really being able to expand for innovation, research, and partnership on that site. As well as recreation, there's going to be a new boat facility for student life to be able to launch, and a restaurant there as well.
Further out Alcoa Highway, we have agricultural properties that we do experiments, I'm sure, there.
Yes, so that is, and there is additional planning happening right now for all of the land grant areas, so the UTI property, and that is the statewide presence and being able to connect, but some of the UTI students do have to get there, and so we talked about the transportation and how that meets their needs as well for their academic and research.
The Cherokee Farm development has actually opened up some really interesting and novel new relationships across the UT system. So as you know, there's a branch of the UT Health Science Center on that side of the river from Knoxville, and we are just launching a new partnership with UTK's College of Nursing to do a joint program aimed at recruitment and retention of nurses, which is a big need for all the hospitals in the area.
different part of the question. We have a partnership called UT Patel, which affects research more in the Anderson County, West Knox, Hardin Valley area. Is any of the growth on your plan relative to that, or is that a whole different entity?
That is pretty discrete because of the nature of the research that's done out there. It's clearance facility work, and so we are keeping that on that property.
Say the overall research needs, we've looked here, we looked downtown, Oak Ridge as well as UTSI are all areas where research will expand for different types of research. And so Battelle is a similar type of institution.
Any questions? So I have a couple questions. I saw this particular slide, and I was really quite amazed with the expansiveness that the campus boundary was in comparison to downtown. And curious to know, inside that boundary, what percentage, outside of historical buildings, what percentage is properties owned by UT versus privately owned?
I don't know if I have that stat. I mean, I think outside of the contiguous area, there are a few. There's a conference center downtown, the Public Institute. There's something for the College of Architecture. I would say the university doesn't have as much outside of that property.
But inside the circle.
I mean, I guess if you count the main core of campus area.
I wouldn't say it's 50. You mean in the radius that we're talking about here? So we have a chart in there. Well, actually, this is it. So the conference center we own, the Institute for Public Service, the Concord buildings, which is where our facilities department is located off campus, and then what's across on Cherokee Farm.
Everything is yellow, so about 50% is not owned.
Oh, at least 50% is not owned by UT.
Just looking at the viability from outside of just the UT system, the viability from an economic growth perspective and what the value is for Knoxville. I understand that on the Strip, I'm not a UT graduate, so I'm not too sure what I'm talking about here, but I know there's a Strip. And there was a $25 million investment provided by the city to be able to support that growth, but the economic impact that's had at a broader level accounts for about $1 billion, which I think is phenomenal. I think as I look at this, you know, my first thought is it growing too fast or not? And I think it depends. You guys know better than I do. What is the local government? What's the mayors of the county and the city thinking about? What the businesses? I have no doubt, and I've heard fantastic things about the collaboration with UT and the rest of the businesses there. So I think that's really valuable and really important. I also believe that leadership matters. As long as the leaders are having the right conversations, that this can be a sustainable and really strong economic benefit for Knoxville. I think there's also a balance that needs to be had between private versus public, and that would be my only concern on this. But as long as you think there's already a strong ratio, then I think there's a good plan.
There is absolutely a strong ratio, and we have committed to the city and to the communities to do anything in partnership that we do within this boundary. In fact, when we did not take the step to go to the boundary approach lightly, we approached the mayor's office, the city mayor's office, and asked for advice. And their advice was, this is a good idea, we're supportive, but go talk to the neighborhood associations in Fort Sanders and South Knox, which we subsequently went and presented the plan to. So it is all in the framework of a partnership.
What is the community input on the architecture?
That's a great question. I keep looking over here because our chief facilities officer is sitting in the audience. We do have design input. Actually, with the master plan, there were several open forums, and we did have community participation.
I would say, I mean, through our entire process, the architecture was never something that really anyone raised. I think we are always working with the institutions to think about how to keep an overall aesthetic by also providing, shifts and changes to meet the pedagogical needs. But it was not something that came up in any of our conversations.
My last question on this has to do with, and I could be very wrong on how I'm stating this, so just bear with me. Recently, there's legislation passed that allows for public-private partnership, and specifically for UT, as opposed to any other four-year institution. For the freshman facilities, because I also understand there was a lot of hotels that had a lot of freshmen this past year. What percentage, or is there any, what sort of private-public partnerships are being established to support the freshmen coming in?
I know that, well, you might be able to answer the details. So I know that these next 2,000 beds are going to be built by public-private partnership, and the university's looking, first-year students are the biggest priority, but to really think about the location of where students live, that will be in nice facilities, but I think they're looking at whether it's the university owned versus the public-private partnership. But the university is working closely with those partners to make sure that it meets the requirements of a first-year living experience as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes. Yes.
Just clarification, the legislation is not related to the public-private partnerships.
Okay, brilliant. With that, if there are any other questions for Mr. Bolton or Ms. Leonard? Okay, I'd entertain a motion to move forward with the master plan.
So move.
Second? All right. Madam Secretary?
Chairwoman Scarlett,
Aye.
Commissioner Kingsolver, Commissioner Kingsolver,
Aye.
Commissioner Coben, Commissioner Matlock,
Aye.
Commissioner Moser, Commissioner Stafford, Commissioner Wharton,
Aye.
Commissioner Winton. Chairwoman, you have 8 ayes.
Wonderful. That's quorum, right?
Yes.
Brilliant.
We're good.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you.
With permission of the commission, and recognizing that those who are guests with Blue Oval City are not super interested in all the master plans, is it okay if we just shift these next 2 agenda items and allow the representatives from Blue Oval City to speak with us now as opposed to? Okay. Well, then let's do that. If you didn't mind, we'd like to welcome both of you to talk with us about Blue Oval City. And just to kind of clear that out, so presenting this today is Ms. Vanessa Presson, who's the Director of Employee Relations at Blue Oval City, and Mr. Andy Bianco, who's Manufacturing, Learning, and Development Manager at Blue Oval City. So welcome. You're recognized.
So much for having us, and I won't speak for Andy, but it's been enjoyable to hear, the strategy and the leadership that's here serving on this board. While we're doing this, let's see here. I'm Vanessa Presson, so I am a Tennessean. I'm from West Tennessee, educated in Tennessee through the Tennessee system, UT Martin, where I first met Dr. Bob Smith. Really grateful for your leadership as interim director. Very, very proud to know you. And then I'm happy to see some familiar faces in the room as well. So just wanted to also shout out to Ann Thompson, who helped coordinate this with Scott Sloan, and then a couple of other people I have here with me. Darcy Kimmett, he is a Canadian on the HR team. He's been here just a few days, and glad to have Darcy. It is his birthday, so happy birthday, Darcy.
Happy birthday.
And then Mary Ann Dunavant, who is on our government affairs team. Pull this up. I think I've been able to.
Technology gods are not smiling on me right now, so my apologies. Try extra port on it. Extended. Pick it up. Yeah, it did work earlier. There it goes. Okay. Thank you.
Have you heard Ford is building a new truck in West Tennessee? What? You're not surprised? After all, Ford has built trucks since 1917. Ford made the pickup truck the most popular vehicle in American history. So, what's new? Just about everything, it turns out. It all started with the question, what's possible? Could we create a truck that gets better and smarter the longer you own it? A digital platform for endless new features and innovation. It had to be sleek, aerodynamic, impossibly quick, resourceful as an Eagle Scout, flexible too, bristling with ingenuity, fast to charge, long on range, ready for work, up for fun, a mobile power station that thrives off the grid, and yes, tough as hell. A truck that can take the wheel and give you back the most valuable resource in modern life, time. An epic sequel to the F-150 Lightning, the truck that brought EVs to the American heartland. A fitting capstone to a century of Ford truck excellence. Project T3, coming 2025. Have you heard Ford is building a new truck in West Tennessee? What? You're not surprised?
So just to give you a high-level overview, for those of you, some of you may have come to our celebration event recently, and this is some of the information that was shared, but we're going to be $50 billion is what's been spent, cumulative investment to electrify our vehicles by 2026. We've got electrifying iconic nameplates. We're number 2 in the electric vehicle brand with the Lightning. We also have 40% of global EV product mix by 2030. Just to kind of, let's see if it's, there we go. Okay. So when you think of Blue Oval City, I like to tell people it's a campus. It's a very large campus. It's about a little over 6 square miles. I was just out there yesterday. It takes quite a bit to get around to all the different buildings that are out there. But you have the Ford Assembly Plant. You may hear sometimes referred to the Tennessee Electric Vehicle Center. And then we have the Blue Oval SK Battery Plant, which is a joint venture between Ford and SK. So the battery plant, the Ford Assembly Plant, and then we'll have additional suppliers on that campus. So that's kind of the integrated approach. When you have suppliers on site, then you're minimizing your costs across for transportation and just overall efficiency. We're able to build the vehicle a whole lot quicker. So T3 is the code name for it. It's Trust the Truck. There's a lot of discussions in Tennessee and other places as well about electrification and the truck in particular, what that will mean to those of us who like to hunt and fish and those things and can't pull my boat and my trailer and all of the things. So T3 is kind of one of those things to trust the truck, because what's coming is very exciting, and we're anxious to be able to share with you what that's going to look like. So what we'll be building is the next generation electric truck. So it's the next generation after that Lightning. So here's some numbers. So 500,000 EV trucks that Blue Oval City is capable of producing when we are running at full production. So $5.6 billion investment, around 6,000 jobs. If you think about the Ford plant as well as that battery plant is the estimate there. And then 2025 is when that vehicle is going to be coming off out of the facility. So this is just a graphic to show just the enormity of it and also the different areas that we have. So it's stamping, body shop, paint, final assembly, and there in the middle you can see on number 5 the supplier facilities, and then that BOSK battery plant, and then battery pack assembly. So we will take the battery from BOSK and then it becomes a Ford process of the battery pack that then will go into the vehicle. Ford's most advanced innovative automotive manufacturing facility in its 119-year history. Ford has not built a new plant in the United States in over 50 years. So there's some challenges with that. So, it's just, there's no book to show you, what you need to do to start a plant. So we're working through those things, but mostly, what's important to me, Andy, our teams are just preparing. What do we need to be doing to prepare for this? Preparing for technology and those types of careers that are going to be so critical to our success, but wonderful and transformational for citizens in the area. So just some other numbers there. Construction is definitely underway. You can see this bottom graphic, the bottom left. It's just hard to really understand the magnitude of how big this is until you're out there standing there, but very large site in Haywood County. Our major milestones, so ground clearing began in the second quarter of 2022. We began construction immediately, and to see the progress that's happened just over time is really impressive. The peak of the construction employment is in that third quarter of this year, and then you can see that 2025 number that just keeps getting sooner every day. So I'm going to turn it over to Andy to talk about some of the things that we're doing in workforce development.
So good morning, everybody. I'm Andy Bianco. I've been with Ford Motor Company 35 years. And in 2 weeks, I become a full-time Tennessee resident. So it's been a long time in coming. So I've been here over a year now working with various institutions, including K through 12, some of your universities, some of the TCATs, basically what we've been looking at is the curriculum that exists in the schools and how that curriculum can either be enhanced or new curriculum that has to be engaged so that we're ready for this technology. When you take a look at what's coming, I call it THEC, it's incredibly complicated and it requires a new state of employee, and we'll get into that here in a few minutes. So we've looked at bringing advanced manufacturing to local schools. We've provided mechatronics training equipment and program equipment to several of the schools around the Blue Oval City. We're looking at how we can basically kickstart the ground level employees starting in the junior and senior years. We're looking at experimental type learning with Ford to partner with the colleges, and then we're going to use advanced technologies to deliver training. One of the rooms in the TCAT will be able to implement quite complex virtual models to teach our employees. And then, of course, the TCAT that the state of Tennessee is helping us build. It's just an awesome facility, and we'll get to see that here in a few minutes. So at Blue Oval City, we're going to have 4 types of teams. This is really important to us, and it's also important to all of you to understand where we're going and what we're doing. Within these teams are 4 levels of employees. That's the hourly side. The salaried side's a little bit different. Production work groups are the initial group of employees that will be coming on, and they're what we call level 1 employees. So every time a vehicle comes into their station, they put parts on the vehicle. The truck departs, the next truck comes in and they do the same thing again. The next work team is the maintenance work teams. Currently, the thought process is that we're going to have 3 skilled technicians: electrician, mechanical, and tool and die. They'll be augmented by maintenance technicians that will currently be patterned after your IMIA program in the TCAT. The technical work team is a little bit different. That integrates both what we call level 2, level 3, and level 4 employee into that team. So if you would take the whole operation, set it in a parking lot, that team can run and maintain it. Those employees at a level 2 will be upskilled with some type of mechatronics program. Level 3 is a maintenance technician. Level 4 is a skilled technician for one of the 3 skilled trades. So this is kind of how we see the people coming out of the education institutions going into our 4 levels, and then plus management and engineering. You can see here 9 through 12. If the right programs are delivered in the high schools during their CTE programs, they could get to a level 2, where they could move to that technical work team on the far right that you saw earlier. The technical schools and community colleges, you can see that band there and how it associates with the current programs that are delivered. We are looking for co-ops and internships, but that will come sometime after the facility is stable. Universities, of course, engineering and management type areas where 4-year degrees and beyond are required. And then we're taking a very close look at your organizations, such as the Veterans Organization and other organizations, and how they're actually preparing people that are leaving the military or underprivileged groups that are located in the area, so that we can help them develop their programs and get people on board at Blue Oval City. This hasn't changed. When we first made the announcement, there was a group of us that were sent down here. By December, we had this model. We have gone back at least 4 times and taken a look at this model. It still holds true today. These will be the 4 areas that we concentrate all our training on at Blue Oval City. This is also what we're bringing to the schools. They have this, they've had it. There's the technical aspects, that's the advanced technologies that will be in the center. The business and functional elements, such as critical thinking, data analysis, those types of things. On the bottom right is lean, how well we do our jobs, how well we eliminate waste and downtime. And on the bottom left are the actual behaviors, dispositions, essential skills. We've heard them called just a bunch of different things, but basically it's how well do you play in the sandbox with others, and can you actually come to work on time and do your job. So this hasn't changed. This is kind of what our whole program is based off of. So everything that we design, everything that we're telling the schools falls into this sphere as it sits right now. This is the TCAT. Was out there yesterday and the day before. Actually, the day before, I walked the site a bit. Just going to be an awesome facility. It's going to have the latest and greatest. We have secured 4 FANUC large robots for the lower left. We're in the process of securing a DUR robot, which will be paint and sealing. BOSK now has identified some of the equipment that will be up in the top middle of that particular lab, and we've now started to design our simulation area. It'll have an area for mechatronics. It will have a full-fledged tool room to prepare tool and die makers, have a welding lab, and it will also have an automotive lab that will be capable of teaching electric vehicle servicing. The top left, I'll call your attention to the first 5 classrooms. Those will be secured for SK. There are certain intellectual property elements that we have to keep secure for the Korean government. So those classrooms will be secured for them. The last classroom up there will be the virtual classroom. There's classrooms on the 2nd level. Just a really great facility. I got to tell you, the people that are working with us to design this have been very, very good to us from the state of Tennessee, and it's been a really quite an interesting ride so far. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Vanessa, and then hopefully we can get some of your questions.
We put here to stay in touch, and I think it's wonderful to have business, industry, education all coming together to really try to collaborate for those jobs that you talked about, the jobs of the future. I mean, things are changing quickly. It's a great analogy with our cell phones and things that are happening. So it's really important that we talk through what our needs are going to be, and it's not just Ford. So we have come here, and there's a lot of people worrying about maybe us taking people from other locations. But if we look at our state, we have a lot of economic development. We have a lot of expansions, things happening where it's a big win for Tennessee when we bring those tax dollars here. But we have to always talk about workforce development in the same conversation. Because if we're not training up, what we need, so much of what we need is what other industry people in this state need. So really important that we talk about that, the technology careers, and I'm going to jump to this one right here. So encouraging others for those careers in manufacturing. I accidentally fell into manufacturing. I'm so glad that happened. But the jobs are coming, and we need more people to really understand that we need college graduates just as much as we need people to upskill through our community colleges and our technical schools. So just to give you an example, we're looking at 200 to 300 engineers that we will need. Okay, that's just us. So I always bring this up. When you look at other countries, that we compete with sometimes, India, China, Mexico even, when they have students that go to school and they don't know what they want to major in, they're going engineering. So they have high numbers of engineers, which is so smart because it's the technology of the future where they're preparing. So I always like to bring this up too when I have a room full of people who are leaders in your communities, leaders overall, that encouraging careers in engineering, I think we need to kind of change this conversation a little bit with business versus engineering. And then I come from rural West Tennessee, so you have a lot of rural people, sometimes maybe more than in more urban areas, that think they can't be an engineer. I think about minorities. I think about females who have this stigma that they're not supposed to be. So we need to eliminate all of those conversations. But we will need so many engineers, but those are all those jobs of the future that's going to make them successful, whether it's Ford or it's not. And that's what's coming down the pike at us right now. So just awareness and expansion of our skilled programs. I love to see the master plan for UT Knoxville that we got to see a little snippet of there, that they're looking at STEM, all of those things that I know others are doing. We have to increase our class capacities at our TCATs and community colleges. Again, not just for Ford, but for the state and the industries that are looking and then looking to come. So again, future demands technology, so we really need to be pushing that. So I'll back it up a little bit and just give you some ways that you can stay in touch with us. Blue Oval City as it relates to the Ford and what we're doing overall at that campus. There's a website there. And then any information related specifically to the battery plant, they have their own website. They have their own careers page versus the Ford site. So QR codes there that you can scan to just stay in touch. So I wanted to give you the opportunity there. So any questions? What can we answer for you?
Questions? Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. So you all have been on the ground now in Tennessee for a couple of years, and you talked about workforce development. What concerns do you have about the educational apparatus within the state in being able to provide the quality and quantity of workforce that you need?
So a lot of your programs are very, very good. They're very well done. What I see is maybe not the closest technology that I've seen at other places. So in other words, for example, what generation of PLC are your schools teaching, right? I'll give you an example. We have to buy 4 simulators for Siemens controllers. That's the stamping plant. That's the first one that comes online. That's a $400,000 investment just for the simulators to teach our employees how to do those PLCs. You don't have a clear plan on short-term stackable certificates that is standardized across the state, and maybe some work in certifications so that they stack. Your articulation agreements are clunky. They don't show a clear path in a lot of cases. So, you know, you're talking about the things that we could do. I really appreciated your comments at the very beginning, because those are the hard conversations that I think you need to have. Does that answer your question?
Thank you for being here. I represent the K-12 side of the house, so really excited to hear the partnership that has started and will continue. I'd love to have you all come speak to our board, because I think there'd be a lot of connections that we'd make too. We're going to be meeting next week, so maybe August, but a lot of conversation about how we can better expand the CTE offerings, thinking about the pathways. I was mentioning to Pam, I know Nashville State graduated on Tuesday, for example, and they had 50 high school students who are graduating with an associate's degree, along with the other community college graduates. So just figuring out how we can scale faster some of those pathways that get, like you said, more of our high school students really into these industry-aligned pathways is the name of the game. And I know as a policy-making body, we're often part of the barrier to that work and want to be part of the solution. So I hope we can get your slides too, just to share those. I'm interested in knowing more about the conversations you're having with the districts in that area, Tipton, Haywood, Lauderdale, if there's more that we can do to help facilitate any other partnership work there, or, again, opportunities and challenges you're seeing there locally.
So we've met with them on several occasions. They've been very, very good to us. They show up. They also know where I'm hiding every day, so if they need to talk to me, they can just show up or give me a phone call. So those conversations have been about, I guess there was a large sum of money given to all the schools. They were looking at how they could spend that appropriately for manufacturing. We gave them some insights into that. We gave them a list of different vendors that they could leverage. One group hired a consulting team that looked at their programs, and they brought that back to us. We reviewed it. We gave them some feedback. So it's been one of those, those conversations with them have been very, very strong. They've been very receptive to our feedback, and I think you're going to see stronger programs coming out of those schools.
Commissioner Coben, did you? No.
Fine. I was going to ask the same question that Vernon asked.
Okay.
So.
Mayor Warden?
Thanks for the presentation. Mr. Donovan, I'm probably the only person in West Tennessee that hadn't been invited to your campus, but that's okay.
You should have a THEC meeting there.
Yeah.
That's not fair for our board. We do ours one meeting.
You know, it's really great that you're here, not merely to let us know, because, I mean, I know how stiff a challenge you're facing. Mention the number of engineers you're going. That mean that it has to be a full-blown engineer, all that stuff. A lot of our folks coming out of college have the greatest productivity before they get opposed to waiting on an engineer to walk across the stage, or their junior year and they become your engineer. Plus, it reduces the student debt load that we're having to pick up. Are you exploring? That's something I'm really interested in.
So there is a plan to go with co-ops and interns after we get stable, because as you can imagine, there's a lot of moving parts that will happen when we first start. The conversation on the battery side is there's some things that we have to work out with the intellectual property rules of the Korean government for co-ops and internships to take place. So on the Ford side, I believe our plan's always been co-ops and interns. It's just when do we pull the trigger on that? And then on the other side, there's a lot of work to do.
You asked specifically about degreed engineers. Yes, we will need degreed engineers, but then there's going to be those who, you know, are in a role right now that they're doing engineering work but may not have that. So we absolutely will consider those with that experience. But yes, we have engaged with the University of Memphis, HBCUs across the state, Lemoyne-Owen, doing different things there. We would like to see some of the HBCUs to get more into the space of engineering, potentially. So it's a takeaway maybe that we've been kind of starting to share. But definitely we're going to consider any and all candidates who are interested in working with us.
Mr. Matlock?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I noticed on the graph where you had 4 different categories, the one that seemed to have the most attention placed in numbers of items said essential behaviors, what many of us refer to as soft skills. We, in our state, I think, need a lot there. Tell the committee what you see, because it doesn't start in the 10th grade or the 12th grade, it starts in the 3rd grade. What can business do to help themselves and thereby help us prepare children to graduate high school to then come into higher education, because there's a huge workforce challenge, I dare say a cultural challenge, in probably every area that you have a location, but in particular, a new plant in a new area in this state. What can we see happen that may bleed back down to where you train children to want to be a worker, whether that worker be an engineer or he be a tier 1 employee? What do you come with that might help all of us?
Wow. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it starts the minute kids enter school. And it's about sharing behavior expectations and then holding them accountable to that. And I understand the public school system now that's pretty difficult to do. But even our orientation, or what do we call it now? Induction. The induction training, the first week that they're on board, they keep changing names. We have a whole section on where our management's going to come in and share their expectations of behaviors. One of the things that's kind of interesting is kids are now connected to their phones and texting and things like that. But when you basically translate that to our work, yes, they need that, but they also need to be able to work together to solve problems, because the problems with more technology become more complex, and it's not one person anymore that can solve an issue. It's a group of people. So how well they work together, a commitment of some kind. There seems to be a lack of commitment to work on time. Well, what does that translate to when they're being educated through the school system? It's taking those small items. It's really interesting. In Mexico, we spent a week down there. I think you spent a week as well, right? They're starting out with something simple. So they got this process called Becario. If the new employee doesn't push their chair in, that's a negative point for them. They score so many negative points, they're done, they're out. So simple things like organizing their space on their desk, and not having a desk that's full of garbage, and pushing their chair in, and understanding standards and expectations and how well they work together. Those are all things that can be taught starting in kindergarten. And if we can get that system in place, or get those behaviors in place early enough. And then the one other thing is, one of your professors shared with us that in order to get a young woman engaged in engineering, we have to get to her in the 3rd grade. So what are we doing in that space to introduce technology, basic robotics, analytics, simple analytics in math classes and things like that, to really engage these kids, because they're smart, and they'll go where they have an interest. And so those are the things around that bottom left-hand corner. One time we had a very, very low attendance problem. Now we have one that's a little bit higher. And, COVID changed the culture a lot. but it's how we ingrain this in them at an early age.
Thing I would add to that is that we've got to increase the labor participation rate. So we need to be looking at things that will remove barriers for people so that they can get into the workforce. But we know as an employer that we have a responsibility because it is kind of a social thing, in my opinion, what we need to do to get people ready to go and where we can count on them, that dependability, the punctuality, things like that. But we know that our process coaches, which is what other industries may refer to as a supervisor, that they're having to be a mother, a father, a coach, a psychologist, a mentor, all of the things to groom them. We have to meet people where they are because we continue to talk about those soft skills, which we now call hard skills, because those are the ones that are going to make sure that they are people are successful. But it does, to me, it's before kindergarten. It's really when they're babies. So thinking about, childcare and curriculum around childcare, I think is an opportunity, getting more of that preparation before school. And again, it puts it back on education to solve these things. But we as citizens need to be able to volunteer in our spare time and help out and mentor, be part of Boys and Girls Club, for example. Some of the things that are out there that we can all do to get engaged to help teach some of these behaviors.
Oh, Commissioner Kingsolver, you're recognized.
So much. So I have a few questions. So I know that in some of the previous earning calls that you've given to your shareholders, you stated that Ford wants to have about 50% of their total vehicle sales being EVs. So I'm wondering how many of those are actually going to be produced in the state, and are we going to be doing primarily trucks, or are there other vehicles that could be potentially brought into the state?
So as far as speaking directly to what we'll have overall, where they're coming from, that's not something that we have access to be able to rattle off a good figure for you. And the second part of the question was the truck. Yeah, what we will build at Blue Oval City is the next generation electric truck.
And that number's up on the screen right now for you to review.
And how soon do you expect the plant to be able to produce that full capacity number?
So the ramp up plan is moving along. I believe there's still a lot of work in that space to be done. We know that we're going to start up in 2025. What the ramp up to $500,000, I haven't seen those numbers yet.
Does that
Thank you so much.
a decade, or I have no clue what it
No.
is? Like a couple of years?
Oh no, they don't. No.
It
They
will
don't-
be
they
a
just literally
decade.
had no idea. Okay. Just curious.
Yeah, no, thanks for that.
Yeah, when we saw the ramp up plan for employees, that was a very interesting education moment.
We need to get to work.
So 6,000 new jobs, and you needed a portion of that by 2025. Your hiring starts this fall, if I remember correctly on the timeline. So, like, what does it look like? I guess let me back up. That's a lot of new jobs, right? And I recognize there's the generational piece. You mentioned veterans. We've got a lot of adult learners that could potentially come back
Underprivileged,
into their
yeah.
workforce. Certainly a lot of high school students from around the broader community there. Of the 6,000 or so, or what you need over the next, say, 24 months, have you been able to map those to TCAS, community colleges, universities? You mentioned earlier about I would say the disconnect of the curricula. There's a little bit that's existing that might be applicable. Probably most of it needs to be enhanced, or we're just lacking in some other things that are needed. Can you help me understand, just as you go through that investigation, what do we have? What do we not have? What do you need? And I'll give you some preface on this. Probably about a decade ago, I'm guessing, something like that, Beretta came to Tennessee, and they went to the Upper Cumberland region. On the front page of the National Business Journal, not soon afterwards, it was, Tennessee sold us to come to Tennessee. We don't have the jobs. We don't have the people to get the jobs. And so they were recruiting from all over the place. And so I don't want that to be the front page of the Tennessean or the Business Journals across the state. So I'm just trying to understand what that looks like right now.
So that's why I talked about economic and development, workforce development. Same conversation. When we attract, recruit, when we're looking at land, when we're looking at sites to put, what are we looking like for those pipelines? So I'll let Andy, but I want to make sure that I clear up. So we will start some hourly hiring next year. So we'll have key positions this year. But I think what you referenced had to do with the construction ramp up of this year. So that.
But also the filling of these roles. You got 6,000 roles, 2025 production begins. Whenever that full capacity is, you're probably gonna need to fill out the rest of the 6,000 that's needed. Like, we need a pipeline of people that are walking into the jobs of tomorrow. I wanna understand whether we have the pipeline of people. Do we have the right curricula in the programs that we currently exist? And how do we really think about this from an analytics standpoint, and knowing that we've got 6,000 jobs?
So I think a lot of your curriculum is in place for what we're going to need. The numbers may not be there of people that are going through that. There needs to be some discussion around, how we're going to do that. So for example, if you take a look at some of the programs, like in high schools, when you look at the CTE programs, they may achieve one certificate out of an entire certification, right? Okay, that's really, really good. But if we can get 2 or 3 certifications, that means when they come to us, we only have to deploy to get them to another level, right? The IMIA, I call that one out because that's the closest fit to what we're going to need in these maintenance technician roles. It's heavy in PLC, heavy in mechanical, and some pneumatics. That's a really nice program. So if you take a look at that, well, how does that play into maybe the 4-year institutions? Maybe there's a place where they can get that hands-on and then go into how to design those systems, right? So maybe there's some type of workspace where they start out in a TCAT or a community college and they move to the community or to the university, but they have that hands-on aspect. Because manufacturing is about hands-on. There's not a lot of designing a whole brand new system. Normally that's done in a central engineering, but having those core skills and understanding how these things function and how they're integrated is really, really important. So I think you have bits and pieces, just like everybody does. It's just how do we put those together, right? So it's not just Ford. You need a lot of industries talking the same and integrating those programs together for the whole.
Is that happening?
Bits and pieces.
Is there anything this commission can do to help support that?
I would add, it's almost like a marketing thing, public relations. I mean, so much of HR is now PR for everybody. You're trying to hire a director and you're trying to attract them, and what does that look like? So it's a PR thing when you're trying to bring people, in. So I believe if Tennessee continues to thrive, which we want it to thrive, it's a marketing situation to showcase the jobs. And where it's not the dirty dungeon thing that still people are, from Ford, from up north, Michigan, that it's in their blood to be in manufacturing. It's still relatively new in the South. So what I run into when I'm speaking to kids about careers in manufacturing, they're like, oh, that's not, I'm supposed to do this, not that. So we've got to, if we're going to keep attracting industry, we've got to try to get the pipeline. And so thank you for the question and for allowing us to talk about this openly with education of what we need, because it goes hand in hand, workforce and economic.
Mr. Coben?
What do you see as your opening hourly salary, your wage?
The wages are not established yet. So there's a lot of people talking about wages. They're not, we have not confirmed any hourly wage right now.
Big piece of
Working
PR.
Huge piece.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree, 100%.
Just glad she has to do that work and not me.
It's a lot of work.
Ms. Preston, Mr. Bianco, thank you very much for being here today and fielding our
Thanks.
questions.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. So with that, so we'd like to go back to the other agenda item we had, which was the University of Tennessee Chattanooga Master Plan. And if we'd like to introduce Dr. Stephen Angle, Chancellor, and then presented by Chrisanne Osserby, Campus Planning. leader and principal of DLR Group. Did I pronounce your last name correctly? Yes. Okay, brilliant, thank you.
Well, thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to make my introductory comments really brief and just set some context for the plan that Chris Ann Osterby will present in more detail. The plan is consistent with our strategic plan for the university and encompasses our goal to engage students in hands-on learning across our campus in every aspect of what they do and connect to the community, the internships driving the workforce. We're right in downtown Chattanooga, so we have some huge opportunities there. Also, the plan encompasses building a sense of community across our campus so that students will persist and graduate. So without any further ado, I will present Chris Ann Osterby to present the plan. Thank you.
And I will also try to expedite my comments, knowing, again, the more important discussion is always your questions. So as the Chancellor stated, the campus planning goals for this 10-year campus master plan for the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga were grounded both on strategic planning aspiration, but also on academic planning, looking at programs, instruction, student experience, for the next generation of student learning, particularly with lessons learned coming from the pandemic. And so with that sense of academic community, student residential communities, a lot of the goals did tie to, first of all, that sense of connectivity and equal access to amenities to support students, services for students, whether they were in an academic environment or a student life environment, particularly equal access as well to residential students as well as commuting students. And so the first two goals are really focused on that access, proper siting and location and expansion of those amenities, as well as safety and security, connectivity to those services, including additional study areas as part of that support and that bridge between in-class and out-of-class, in-lab, out-of-lab experience. There is a high demand for on-campus residential life experiences at the university that has continued unabated. And so there is a proportional reflection in the master plan for an additional number of beds that is a net increase beyond what is currently cited on the campus. And as we have all been listening to and talking about today, the biggest space need is looking at flexible interdisciplinary lab space. So the goal to best accommodate that, both in existing buildings that can be repurposed as well as new construction, was a significant need. The goal that you're looking at for the space needs is, if you will, a goal that's looking at all of the gaps. There's also roughly 100,000 square feet, which I'll show in a further table, that can be repurposed, that is classroom and office space now to higher intensity, so that overall assignable square footage could be reduced with that further study and programming. So the physical planning themes that support those goals are looking at the context of Chattanooga. It's a dense urban campus, it's community engaged, and so it's looking at strengthening boundaries not only for experience, but to have outreach to partners, to look at significant enhancement and expansion of the quality of the campus environment that has happened over the 10 years, from core open space and greenway, again, that safety and security that happens and connects all academic precincts and learning centers and community partners into the campus, to really showcase those points of pride, these areas of advanced learning as well as undergraduate support that can be immediately understood and foster interdisciplinary connectivity rather than silos in learning and living. And again, to strengthen the residential hubs that are there while also strengthening partnership hubs on the perimeter. The planning context recognizes that the outreach, the constellation of programs and services in the Chattanooga area far extend beyond the downtown. You'll see the small scale of the downtown campus and its planning boundary on the far left, but you can see that expanded outreach and service that is part of the applied engaged learning and research of the university across and all the way to significant presence at Enterprise South on the eastern part of the community. This takes a very different approach than the Knoxville plan. The planning boundary was actually confirmed and only adjusted very slightly from a planning boundary that was established 10 years ago, and that comes from continuing deep conversations with partners, with city, with corporate, with healthcare organizations. So really, the Georgia Avenue is respecting and reflecting downtown investment on the west side of the campus. The river makes a very logical boundary for this, again, focused urban experience for this campus, as well as relationships on the north with Erlanger Medical Center that have its own aspirations and plans for partnerships and expansion and growth. On the east side is active railroad tracks. The area that you see in the middle is a significant historic district. And so you can see the targeted partnerships in the brown on this plan that augment the existing property in blue are not touching or moving into that historic district, and that has been confirmed with the neighbors. So again, looking at facility conditions, deferred maintenance, the majority of facilities are in good to fair condition, but there's a significant opportunity in academic facilities, but primarily in student life, residential student serving facilities outside of labs that can be looked at for replacement or enhancement over time. There's also facilities that are in critical condition or already approved for demolition. There's a much higher and better use of land in this campus. We looked very specifically at enrollment assessment, looking 10 years back on trends, as well as looking 10 years forward. Those enrollment numbers were also tested for faculty, staff, and research appointments, and they were done in the full light of new academic programs, many of them focused on non-traditional learners, online learning, as well as in-seat learning, for approximately 2,000 to 3,000 increased enrollment, a very conservative aspirational number over time. The projected space needs were again done very specifically at what are the gaps right now in case that enrollment remained flat, but aspirationally how that would change in 10 years. As you've heard continuously today, those gaps really are in the applied learning spaces, hands-on need for instructional labs, open labs, applied research, and those kinds of experiential learning spaces, in addition to that triple impact, if you will, with increased residential housing support. There's the student services that go with that, student life, and recreation, health, and wellness. This campus vision does show all of the space needs are able to be accommodated within a good utilization of existing space and repurposing existing facilities. And this is done at the scale of the existing campus with some augmentation to a mid-rise level, again, done with full knowledge and communication with partners and with the community. There were 3 phases of planning. Much of this planning, it looks like a lot is going on in the first 4 years, but it's actually projects that have been discussed for years. They're priority. They have been planned by the institution, and a number of them are already approved, such as the Health Science Center Phase 1, as well as a new housing facility. So the most important additions to that are going forward with renovation of state office property that has come to the university in the last 10 years, an expansion of health sciences that's anticipated to occur very quickly to phase 2, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary research facilities, and the previously planned and priority project for modest renovation, but then more important, in addition to Fletcher Hall. You can see with that great positioning in place, midterm needs are fairly modest. They're looking at that expansion of applied research and interdisciplinary education, as well as supporting the health sciences, and then again, student housing, depending on enrollment demand. And the vision plan is very similar. It's looking, again, that expansion for research, for interdisciplinary construction, and again, if needed, as demand emerges from student enrollment, improvements, increased housing to meet that final anticipated demand. So the final summary recommendations, again, are focused on building that strong health science quad, complemented by research and interdisciplinary instruction that reaches across all disciplines, but especially for STEM, and then looks at the infill of academic programs, housing, support services for students to meet that projection for enrollment, but the strategic planning and academic planning to properly serve those 8 new academic programs if they're approved. So that concludes my presentation. Look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. You did a very swift job there. I'd like to open up to any questions from the commission.
Osterby, I'm just curious about the privately owned space that kind of separates the sports complex from the rest of the campus.
Yes, sir.
What are the plans over the period of time to eventually?
No, sir, because that is the Fort Wood Historic District, and actually, in an important way, it already serves the institution by providing a very significant residential district for faculty and staff. It has preceded the university and has historic district designation, and so there's been conversations well over a decade long of continuing to support the integrity of that neighborhood. So what there was in the master plan was not the idea to chip away and undermine that neighborhood, but to support more along the bounding edges of that neighborhood, particularly along 3rd Street in combination with city planning for a health science innovation district that can emerge with Erlanger Regional Hospital, but also to look along Macaulay Street, again, where there's more evolving shifts in neighborhood-based retail, prominent places where actually the university can have an appropriate presence there, and the historic district does not extend to that area south. So essentially, they will remain a very positive force for good, a residential force for good, stabilizing in the middle of that potential growth in residential and sports components near the campus. This is in addition also to those sports and recreation that take place off campus right now at Finley Stadium and in other locations.
Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner.
Scrappy Moore Field.
Yes, sir.
Soccer?
No, that's for, essentially, that's been the historic location for the football practice. And so it's a wonderful location along the river. The thought is with some of the enhanced opportunities that are happening right now with an addition on campus near the basketball arena, the Coliseum, the sports complex, that field area would be maintained as significant open space for sports and recreation, but also as a better hub for the rowing club activity and sports. Also, it has some floodplain issues, so although people would love to put condos there, it's probably not the most appropriate location.
Any other questions? If none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the master plan. So moved. Second. Madam Secretary?
Chairwoman Scarlett,
Aye.
Commissioner Kingsolver, Commissioner Kingsolver,
Hey.
Commissioner Coben, Commissioner Matlock,
Aye.
Commissioner Moser,
Aye.
Commissioner Stafford, Commissioner Wharton, Commissioner Winton. Chairwoman, you have 8 ayes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, both of you. So the remaining items we have on the calendar don't require any vote. Given the time that we have at 10 till 12, I know that we were probably about to lose the entire audience here. So what I would suggest is if we could have the notes to the final 3 items delivered to the commission members for review, I think that'd be fantastic. I would like to offer 1 minute for, okay, maybe 2, for Dr. Smith to provide us some level of report over the past several months.
Well, in taking that, I want to comment to begin with on this meeting. One of the things that I was charged with back in January was to create greater interaction, greater dialogue, and that has absolutely happened today. And I hope that you've been comfortable that this room has helped. That was one of the decisions we'd made, and that the commissioners are comfortable with the level of engagement that they had. I want to say we had, including the January meeting, because I don't want to forget this, we had a glimpse of the future of post-secondary education, and we all ought to be excited about it. In the January meeting, we had what was a once-in-a-generation transformational master plan for the Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technology, and that is coming into force. But today, you saw competing plans that also gave us a glimpse of the future of post-secondary education. You couldn't help but notice that in both the University of Tennessee Knoxville and the University of Tennessee Chattanooga, all of the discussion about collaborative, about disciplinary spaces, about using what I am very fond of in capital projects is the psychology of space to shape behavior, to create the kinds of outcomes that Ford tells us that they have got to have. And it directly addressed Commissioner Matlock's questions about it, and thank you for the insight that you were bringing. I spend about 20% of my time working on this project, either with state agencies or with institutions related to Ford. It is that important. It's not important because it's Ford alone. It is all about Tennessee. But our institutions are going to have to see more about the nature of the future as relates to curriculum design and the kinds of workforce expectations that we have to have for the population of the future if we're going to serve Tennessee. So I'm on the road a lot in the next couple of weeks at individual campuses and invite presidents here to allow me to come to your campus to talk about some of these ideas and to get an exchange going around these issues. TBR and their work with their community colleges and their TCATs are doing a phenomenal job with this. But I will challenge that our institutions have got a ways to go, and Ford pretty much said that today. So I don't want to lose sight of that, but I want to be optimistic about it as well. And with that, Madam Chair, I finish my 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. We've lost a Madam Chair, but I will, in her stead, entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you all.
That's very true. Thank you.
You too. You going back this afternoon?
Always. Yes, that was very.
What is it take for 3 hours?
How's the east end of town? Is it open?
I'm happy to. Hey, we have an announcement about lunch.
Conference room P across the hall. There are box lunches if you're hungry and ready to eat. So
Yes.
please come by.
It does start in preschool.
The grandchildren were
Please and
not
thank you.
prepared for manufacturing.
Well, no, same. I mean, I don't know. I'm glad I can do that. Not my
So I say that to say that
Are they watching themselves these days?
George watches. Thanks for adding that comment. Oh, wait, pretty good too.
So if you
See you soon.
Yeah, please. Do we have meetings?
No, person. We should.
Not like that. Sold out. I have one to add. Just tell me where to go. What's best for you? I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no.